Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go over some of the logistics for the meeting. If you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the Zoom option for Q&A. You can put the speaker's name before you ask the question, and then the moderator will read the questions to them and they can address them. Don't ask your questions in the chat. Use chat for comments and discussion, and you can toggle to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your chat. For continuing education today, we have DPR credits and we also have Certified Crop Advisor credits. For DPR, we're going to have a couple poll questions after a few of the speakers. Please take them so we can track your participation. And then after about probably tomorrow morning, you'll get an email with an exam that you'll have to take and you'll have to pass by 70% in order to get the credits. Do not take the exam if you don't want DPR credits. Pretty much everyone attending will receive the email. But yeah, you have 1 week to take the exam and we'll guarantee your results within 1 week. For CCA, you'll get a QR code at the end of the meeting up on your screen, which you can just scan with the CCA app. You can get it in any app store for mobile device. And if you can't use the app, no worries. You can send your CCA number to A&R program support at ucanr.edu, the same place you got your confirmation email from. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 69th Annual Grape Day. Our event today is brought to you by the Lodi Chamber of Commerce and the University of California and all of their amazing support people that they have for our county. Today, I'd really like to thank our Grape Day, our Lodi Chamber of Commerce Ag Committee. We have several people on there that were able to bring you this event today. The fact that we're able to come to you virtually and kind of just go with what we're doing this year is amazing. I do have to apologize to you though. We do not have donuts and coffee this year. I know that's really why you guys come every year, and unfortunately you will be lacking there. Hopefully next year the donuts and coffee will be flowing and we will have them ready for you. But this year we're doing the best we can with what we've got. So I'd like to thank Dr. Stephanie Bolton with the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, Bree Hunt with Constellation Brands, Jerry and Bruce Fry with Moher Fry Farms, Joe Valente with Couts Farms, Sarah Meitinger with Bank of Stockton, Mickey Nuss with F&M Bank, Amy Blagg with the Lodi District Grape Growers Association, and Larry Whitehead, who's a PCA. They have done a great job in working, getting together and doing the best we can to bring you all of the content that you just working with the UC for today. And Pat Patrick and Marina Navarte with the Lodi Chamber of Commerce, who have been doing a lot of behind the scenes work. So thank you all for everything that you do for our community and coming together for today. And thank you to all of our speakers. We're excited to hear what you bring to us today.
And with that, I am Kari Arnold. I am the Stanislaus County Farm Advisor for University of California Cooperative Extension. I cover grapes, walnuts, apricots, and cherries. Kamyar Aram will also be helping us today. He covers a variety of crops in the, can I say, Bay Area, Kamyar? I think we've got Contra, Costa, and Alameda. And am I missing one?
3 counties.
3 counties. He covers a lot of ground. And so he's helping us out today as well. He'll be moderating later on. Yes, big thank you to our sponsors. Big thank you to our speakers. I don't want to delay. I do want to remind you all that later on there will be a survey, an impact, like a quality assurance type survey. You guys can let us know how we did. Was the information valuable? What else would you like to see? That sort of thing. That will be posted in the chat later today. Please do take a moment to fill that out. It helps us in terms of letting our administrators know how much you value this information. So without further ado, I see we're up to 127 attendees. I want to give you some valuable information today. I'm going to turn it over to Beth Stone Smith. She is with the USDA. She works diligently with Glassy wing sharpshooter and Pierce's disease, and she's going to talk to us today about the statewide program and how we can help. Take it away, Beth.
Excellent. Okay, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm excited to be with you guys today. I'm Beth, and I have been in California working on Glassy wing sharpshooter for 20 years now. I spent 11 of those years in Bakersfield, and the remaining 9 years I've been in Sacramento. So prior to working on that, I was in graduate school and doing a number of things. So I'm really excited that I've spent most of my career in California. Next slide, please. So why am I here? Basically, I'm here because of this. This is Pierce's disease in table grapes. This actually is a picture from Kern County from a number of years ago. But this can happen in any location with grapes that has a vector of Pierce's disease and especially has glassy wing sharpshooter. So we're going to get into some specifics on the program related to this. Next slide. So really today, the first two items I am just barely going to touch on. There is so much information on this program and activities happening in California that in 30 minutes, I can't do justice to it. And really, I want to share with you the area-wide programs that we've been talking about. But I am going to frame some things just so that we're all kind of on the same page. Next slide. So this program really kicked off because of a situation that happened in Temecula, California back in 2000. This headline is from an article from Wine Spectator, and the pictures you're seeing on the left, of course, glassy wing sharpshooter on grape. The middle picture is the disease, what it looks like inside the grapevine, and then the results that occurred in Temecula, California of thousands of acres of grapes having to be pulled out because of Pierce's disease. At the beginning of this, there was all kinds of activities at the county level, the state level, the federal level, and the industry level, and that resulted in a program being implemented in California. Next slide. One thing we're going to keep in mind, but I'm not going to talk to you about, is that in this family of diseases, what causes Pierce's disease, there are actually a whole bunch of other diseases caused by the same bacteria. I'm obviously not going to talk to you about all of those today, but it's just an awareness that there are different strains of the disease that can cause issues in other things. The one obviously this program focuses on is Pierce's disease in grapes. If you've traveled to Southern California and you see those medians along the highway of oleander, you may have even seen some oleander leaf scorch at the bottom of the slide there. There has been some severe impacts in Southern California from that. Next slide, please. So Pierce's disease is not new to California. You guys probably know that. It's been around for a really long time. It's actually part of the reason there are not table grapes grown in the Los Angeles basin, because there is just too much disease and other vectors. There are vectors that occur in California before glassy wing sharpshooter showed up. In the 1930s and 40s, the San Joaquin Valley had a problem with Pierce's disease, and it was vineyards that were next to alfalfa fields. And it was different insects causing that problem. Green-headed and red-headed sharpshooters were actually causing Pierce's disease in those vineyards. Then we come to 1999, 2000, again, the Temecula Valley's issue, and we've had some reoccurring issues in Kern County as well. When you look at the North Coast, we've had Pierce's disease there for a long time, and that tends to be consistent and moderate. It kind of fluctuates. And that is not caused by glassy wing sharpshooter. That is caused by a native sharpshooter called blue-green sharpshooter. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so let's focus on glassy wing and Pierce's disease. The causal agent of Pierce's disease is Xylella fastidiosa. I know, really ugly scientific name. You'll see people put just XF for short, but the bacteria is actually Xylella fastidiosa. What happens is the bacteria is picked up by the mouth parts of Glassy wing sharpshooter feeding on a plant. It then feeds on another plant, and the bacteria can loosen up from its mouth parts and be deposited into the tissue of the plant. Over time, those bacteria multiply. It ends up choking off the water conducting tissues of the plant. And next slide. And then we're back to this. That's where symptoms occur. In the worst case scenario, really severe symptoms. And there is no cure for this at this point. So when a vine has to be taken out, it has to be taken out completely. You can't just cut it off at the base, because any of that new tissue that grows can have the disease in it, be picked up by an insect and moved along. Next slide. Okay, Glassy wing sharpshooter. So bottom picture on the left is a comparison of glassy wing size to a blue-green sharpshooter, which is the prevalent insect that moves Pierce's disease around on the North Coast. Blue-green sharpshooter tends to be along riverbeds and riparian areas. And so when it comes out of its habitat and moves into the vineyard, it feeds just kind of on the edges. So they tend to, on the North Coast, just see infection of Pierce's disease on the edges of a vineyard. Glassy wing sharpshooter, as you can see, is a much larger insect. It can fly really far, it's very strong, and it feeds differently. It can feed on the soft tissue at the terminal ends of vines, but it also can feed on the woody parts of tissue. So when it can cause infection, it can cause it throughout the plant. It can cause it throughout the vineyard. And there are a couple other issues with this pest as well that makes it a different kind of insect for us to deal with in California. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Glassy wing sharpshooter as an adult, as well as egg masses. You can see it lays multiple eggs. Typically, we see 2 to 3 generations in California. It really depends on weather and where you are. We have seen a 3rd generation in Kern County a few years ago, and it caused quite a population explosion for us to try and contain. So very much affected by weather. And there are 5 nymphal instars for this insect. So it overwinters as an adult. And then we tend to see mating and egg laying early in the season in February, March. Go ahead, next slide. And here's one of the other big issues and challenges with this pest. This slide is not for you to read all of those words on there. It is just to show you that this pest has an enormous host list. We have over 350 hosts for glassy wing sharpshooter. So from a standpoint of trying to contain and control an insect, this thing can be a real beast for us to try and contain and control. It's a challenge. Next slide. So with all of the things that happened in Temecula with the loss of vineyards and all of the activities of people coming together and talking about it, what ended up happening in 2000 was a program was formed at the state level. So within the California Department of Food and Agriculture, there is a program called the Pierce's Disease Control Program. It receives funding from the federal government. It works with counties and industry. And really the goal is to try and reduce Pierce's disease in California. And the way in which it does that is to try and contain glassy wing sharpshooter specifically. And so there are a number of entities involved. Next slide. This is a really cooperative program. Our best programs are ones that are highly cooperative and have everybody at the table. So as I already mentioned, federal, state, county, University of California, industry groups, and the public. We've got all of those things involved in this program, and we've had those partnerships for 20 years, and those partnerships remain really strong. And that's really a key, especially for a program that's been going on as long as this, because it hasn't gone away. Next slide, please. So that Pierce's Disease Control Program gets about $15.5 million in federal funds every year. There are also other funds that have come into the program over time, whether it be from the state level or the industry level. And I'm not going to tell you about each of these components because there's too much to tell you about, but I wanted you to at least have just an outline that there is a lot of things going on in California to try and slow the spread of glassy wing sharpshooter and to try and keep it away from you. A couple of the things specifically that I will highlight, if you're aware of industry money that goes towards activities, those rapid response urban treatments is a key piece that industry provides funding for, as well as public outreach and research. Industry has really carried the load of funding the research side of the program, which could be a whole presentation for you on the side. There's so much going on. But what I'm here to talk to you about is the very bottom one, the area-wide programs. So let's go into that, please. Next slide. So why we're doing it, what is it? Area-wide programs basically trying to suppress the population of glassy wing sharpshooter over large agricultural areas. The picture on your bottom left there is bulk citrus. Glassy wing sharpshooter can be moved in bulk citrus. So trying to treat glassy wing in that host specifically is what we're going to focus on here. Next slide. So again, why are we doing this? Glassy wing is a really strong flyer. So when you're talking about an area-wide program, it will not work for us to just treat one grower and leave its neighbor alone. We have to treat in a coordinated fashion and buffer out our treatments, because otherwise glassy wing will just fly over to another host, another neighbor, and we're not making any progress. And again, this insect has many hosts. We are focusing on its overwintering population, which specifically targets citrus, because citrus remains green all season long, and glassy wing sharpshooter really, really likes citrus. Next slide. So why are we doing it? As I already mentioned, we're buying time for the research to find an answer to Pierce's disease. Never did I think when I started on this program 20 years ago that we would still be buying time 20 years later, or that we'd be able to buy time for 20 years. But we are continuing to work really hard to do that. There are grape growers living with glassy wing sharpshooter and Pierce's disease, so we're really trying to also help them lessen their impact. And we're trying to slow that spread of glassy wing sharpshooter. So that means not only because it's a strong flyer, we're trying to slow its natural spread, but we're also trying to slow the artificial spread. So glassy wing can be moved in bulk citrus. It can be moved on nursery plants from Southern California. That picture of those egg masses, you can imagine on the underside of leaves, all of the egg masses that could be shipped all over the state of California if we were not trying to look for those and stop that. Okay, next slide. So area-wide programs are in diverse ag areas. And that means, again, we are trying to manage a pest that has a huge host list with a limited amount of money, not wanting to spray chemicals on every single crop in every single area, because that's not responsible, nor is it financially available to us to be able to do that. So this is an example of where we started the program, and all of that orange color is citrus along the east side. This is actually in Kern County. And one of the things we have in this area specifically is there are windbreaks around each of those citrus orchards. And of course, which is also a host for glassy wing sharpshooter, because what isn't a host? So when we're treating, we've got eucalyptus, we've got beefwood, we've got grapes, cherries, blueberries, you name it. We're trying to deal with it, but really targeting glassy wing sharpshooter in citrus. Next slide. So we have an enormous amount of traps out, and those traps are out on a 1/4 mile grid. In citrus and grapes and other crops. And really that's our monitoring system to tell us where to go for treatments. Those are checked every 2 weeks. Traps are run either by state staff or the counties, and information relayed to us at the program so that we know where to go for a treatment program. And we then also monitor after the fact to see if what we did was effective or not. Next slide. So I've already mentioned a couple times that we are targeting citrus, and I keep saying that on purpose because this is a grape pest with a grape disease, and we're targeting citrus. So how does that even make sense, Beth? Again, we're targeting that overwintering host for glassy wing. And when we can target that one host, we can get really effective results if we're able to do treatments on a large scale. So we're targeting citrus. It gets citrus growers to participate with us. We are reliant on that participation. I have no authority to make them do a treatment. I have no authority to say you have to. It's all a partnership and a relationship to try not to disrupt what they have going on, but to try and get results for grape growers and reducing peer disease. Okay, and I should highlight there suppression. These are not eradication treatments. We are not going to eradicate glassy wing sharpshooter from these areas for all of the reasons I've already talked about, the hosts, the difficulty in treating, all of those things. Okay, next slide. So in a perfect world, our treatment regime is what I call a 1-2 punch. We try and do a foliar treatment to target that overwintering population. I want to kill them before they mate and lay eggs. If we miss some of that population and they do mate and they do lay eggs, then we want to have a systemic imidacloprid in the system in the citrus tree so that when the insect feeds, it dies. Okay, that's my perfect scenario when we move into a program. I say that specifically because I don't have the money any longer to do that every time. Next slide. Okay, now I'm just going to take you through a couple of maps and some easy to read graphs on where we are in the San Joaquin Valley. Madera County is our northernmost front of where we have population of glassy wing. This is a map from total year trap of glassy wing for 2020. The red dots are singles, the blue dots are 2 to 5s, and then you can look at the legend for the rest. This is again, our northern front of where we have it in the San Joaquin Valley, but glassy wing sharpshooter can survive further north than this. We have had infestations that were caught very early and able to be eradicated because they were caught early in Dixon, California, in Sacramento County. We've had multiple of those over time. So we're really trying to keep this front, though, of moving through the ag system in Madera County and keep it south. Next slide, please. So as we start looking at these graphs, I just want to highlight that left-hand scale because it's going to change drastically for you as we move south in the San Joaquin Valley. So some increase in what we saw in Madera County last year. I mean, 34 insects trapped for the entire year is really obviously not bad, but it's more than we've seen in the past. So we are concerned about that. We are addressing that with the county and with the state. We are actually hiring a specific treatment coordinator in this area to help better coordinate what we're doing and how we're doing it because we're so concerned and we don't want this to move further north. Okay, next slide. Fresno County, again, this is the total number of glassy wing trapped in 2020 is what this map represents. And you can see a lot of activity in that northeast corner. We've got one grower specifically that hasn't wanted to work with us on the program. And again, that's a concern. And treatment coordinator we are hiring is going to help us address that. We have these treatment coordinator positions that are non-governmental. They work better, in my opinion, and in the people that started this program's opinion, to have someone that was not from the government, not from a regulatory agency, to talk to growers and PCAs and speak your language and be able to have the discussion about doing a treatment and why. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, that left-hand scale. And we had a significant increase in Fresno County of glassy wing sharpshooter this past year. Again, same concerns as with Madera. I don't want this to spread further north. I don't want it to expand and impact more grape growers. So we are working on how we mitigate what we have been seeing in the San Joaquin Valley. It was a warm year last year that absolutely played into what we are seeing in our insect population levels throughout the San Joaquin Valley. Okay, let's move south. Tulare County. And Tulare County is a huge, huge citrus county, 130,000 plus acres. And we've got traps all the way up it. Those orange lines that you see are what we call the generally infested area. So that's an area where we expect to see glassy wing sharpshooter. We don't expect to see it outside of those areas. And you can see in 2020, we've got some dots outside of those areas. So those are priority treatment areas so that those populations do not expand. And I really do not want to see glassy wing move throughout this 131,000 acres of citrus because that would be some major impacts for us, for the packing houses, for the citrus growers, and just for that movement of glassy wing further that we don't want to be dealing with. Okay, next slide. Treatment priorities. Again, treating near grapes is a priority to bring down population levels. And I'm highlighting that here with Tulare and Kern because that's where the majority of our treatments are happening this past year because of how high the populations got. Treating those fines outside of those infested area boundaries again, so that it's not moving further outside of where we have it contained. And then our third priority level would be treating high population levels. Okay, next slide. I talked about that 1-2 punch of foliar and systemic treatment. For Tulare County, we shift that foliar a little bit, and instead of a December or January timing, we actually do an October or maybe into November timing. And the reason for that is because of the soils in a lot of the area in Tulare County. Once it rains, citrus growers are not getting a rig into those soils and into those citrus orchards. They're also doing a treatment with gibberellic acid, and they can do our treatment at the same time they're doing that one. So it just makes sense to try and coordinate that and get those done in that fall timeframe that works well for us. Next slide. And with that fall timeframe, we've had some good results. Back in 2003, when that program started, we treated almost 40,000 acres with that foliar program. And then we followed up with almost 20,000 acres of systemic imidacloprid. That dropped those bars all the way down in 2005 to really low levels. We are seeing things now in subsequent years start to creep back up. Couple of reasons for what we're seeing in 2020. One, I mentioned it was a warm year for us. We are seeing increases in glassy wing across the San Joaquin Valley. Something else that's changed in Tulare County specifically is the number of organic citrus orchards. With an insect that is such a strong flyer and has so many hosts, we need longevity of product. And an organic product just doesn't adhere to our longevity of need of residual for glassy wing sharpshooter. And we have seen a significant increase in organic citrus acreage all around Tulare County. So that's making management for us that much more of a challenge. We actually have some specific research going on to try and help us optimize that treatment. And we're continuing to try to find better ways to do that so that we can manage that. Okay, next slide. Kern County, this is our beast for glassy wing sharpshooter, and this is where the program started. Again, this is trap totals for 2020, and so this map's gonna look really ugly. Just warning to you. Go ahead and go next slide. For Kern, we actually had such problems in 2015 that we had to alter our treatment regime to where we added a foliar application. We actually only did that second foliar one time because we've only been able to afford it one time, but it helped knock population levels back in the year that we saw 3 generations of glassy wings, specifically in areas of Kern County. Okay, next slide. Okay, this one's all over the place. This program started in 2001 in Kern. You can see a number of years where we had pretty low levels and then things starting to creep up on us. 2015 is the season that we had 3 generations. We've been able to knock things back to a great degree, but then again in 2020, we're seeing a pretty significant increase. And that significant increase in 2020 caught my attention because I've been given these presentations so long. Back to that first bar in 2001. Next slide. And actually that first bar in 2001, the population levels were just from that area circled. So now we're talking 141,000 insects countywide. Back in 2001, 141,000 insects was just in that circle. So we're not back to those levels, but we don't want to be where we are right now. Next slide. Challenges, we already mentioned some of them, and you can imagine how many hosts we have. Other IPM strategies for growers. We don't want to be disrupting things for citrus growers. Organic citrus treatments, I already mentioned. We have trouble controlling glassy wing in organics. Obviously, we have little cities and things around these egg areas where glassy wing can move back and forth from backyards. That urban interface can be a challenge. Weather, can't control that, but we are seeing some changes in our weather patterns that are going to impact us on population level. And I've mentioned multiple times already funding. Funding, if we don't have the funding, we can't do the treatments to the extent that we have trap fines. And the one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the last thing on that list, and that's chemical resistance. We do have evidence of some chemical resistance in glassy wing sharpshooter in the very southern part of Kern County to certain neonicotinoids. And that's not just from our program, that's from other pest programs who are also using those products, vine mealybug, Asian citrus psyllid. So that's part also of why we've backed off on some of our treatments. Next slide. So what can you do? If you don't know about this program, I take that sort of as a double-edged sword. That's a communication error on our part. It's a failure on us communicating. But then on the other side of it, if you don't know a lot about this program, then I actually feel sort of positive about that in that it hasn't affected you yet. If you haven't seen me, then you're probably not dealing with glassy wing sharpshooter directly, and you're probably not having losses to Pierce's disease. But we don't want you to get to that point. So we really want everybody to stay informed and stay engaged, because again, our best programs and our success hinges on industry and growers and everybody being at the table, because that's how we do our best work, is when we're talking to each other. Next slide. And past and present, we're at the point in Temecula where many of the grape growers who have vineyards there don't know anything about glassy wing sharpshooter back in 2000 and 2001 because they weren't there, but they've been able to replant and build their industry. And we want to continue to do that. So all of the challenges that keep happening with managing and mitigating glassy wing sharpshooter, we're going to continue to work on until research finally has an answer on the Pierce's disease side of things. Next slide. And I think that is it for me. And then there's the poll questions that are coming up next.
Yes, Kelly, please read the polls. So thank you, Beth. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is a poll. All you have to do is attempt to answer these questions based on what you heard in the presentation. We're doing this because DPR requires us in part to ask you during the meeting the questions that are related to the presentations. There will be a follow-up email later by tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon that you will also click the link, you will fill out that survey, you will enter your license number, and you will answer these questions. And that's how you'll get your DPR credits. So I see lots of responses. That's fantastic. It gives us an opportunity to interact a little bit in this virtual setting. I'm going to go ahead and we're still getting people responding, so keep responding. This is fantastic. We're all going to be experts by the end of this. So I do have some questions in the Q&A. So I think we've met 100 respondents. Beth, go ahead and talk about the poll here, the questions here.
Okay, so which of the following is a vector of Pierce's disease? I hope you answered glassy wing sharpshooter.
Looks like everyone did.
Perfect. There are obviously other vectors, even ones that are native to California, but the two other ones listed are not. So, and number 2, causal agent of Pierce's disease, Xylella fastidiosa, true. And number 3, I sort of tried to trick you there. The glassy wing sharpshooter does not use citrus as a host. False. It absolutely uses citrus. It loves citrus.
Very good questions, very good responses. We're all learning things today. We do have some questions, and we have 10 minutes for question and answer. So I encourage more to feel free to ask some questions about this presentation today. The Q&A is, you can reach it by scrolling, putting your cursor down at the bottom and hovering over the bottom of the Zoom window, and a bunch of options will pop up. So you'll see Q&A there, and then you can enter into the Q&A. So Beth, I'm going to start sending you some questions here. First question is, I'm in Lodi. Why should I be concerned about glassy wing sharpshooter and Pierce's disease? We don't have either here.
Well, I'm glad to hear you don't have either one there, but both could absolutely occur in the Lodi area. There are no environmental constraints that would keep it from you. So our concern is that that area that's so important to the grape industry in Lodi would then become infected with Pierce's disease or glassy wing sharpshooter. Those other strains of glassy wing are interesting, and I don't know enough to speak too much about it, but there are strains of the Xylella fastidiosa that can occur in weeds on the side of roads. So if you should get a vector, whether it's glassy wing sharpshooter or some kind of spittle bug or some other sharpshooter from California, it feeds on those grasses, those sunflowers, whatever, and moves it into a vineyard, you could have a perfect scenario that we didn't even realize was happening near you, because it ends up having the grape strain that's not showing symptoms in those weeds, that then ends up getting moved by another vector. So it's I'm glad you're not concerned about it, but the concern, I hope, doesn't go to just ignoring it completely, because it could absolutely happen further north and where we're seeing it right now, which is why we're doing so many activities to try and keep it from moving throughout California.
Thank you. Another question is, wouldn't citrus growers already be using these chemicals for Asian citrus psyllid?
Great question. So partially, yes. The chemicals that are used for ACP, some of them are also effective against glassy wing, but the timing is different. So when they're using them for ACP, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best timing for glassy wing. So you're not going to impact the population of glassy wing the same way you're trying to impact ACP. There are also chemicals for ACP that are not effective against glassy wing sharpshooter, and vice versa. So we work with that program really closely in the southern San Joaquin Valley, because obviously for citrus growers, that insect and Huanglong Bing, the disease, that's their glassy wing and Pierce's disease issue. That's their priority, and we don't want to take anything away from them. But unfortunately, things don't match up perfectly in those programs.
And we have another question that is similar to the previous one, but maybe there's a little bit more to elaborate. For area-wide treatments, do you think growers were not already using insecticides or just using them at incorrect times?
They were using insecticides, but they weren't timing them in an area-wide fashion. So our treatment coordinators actually contact growers within an area to try and say, within the next 2 weeks, we need you to treat, so that we're moving in kind of a precise time frame specific to the biology of the pest. So they may have been using those for other pests, but when you're just spot treating everywhere, you're not getting the effect of an area-wide approach to drop overall population levels.
Thank you. How does the population of glassy wing sharpshooter in Kern and/or Tulare County affect us in Lodi? Are you primarily trying to protect grape growers in those areas, or does it really have an effect on how fast glassy wing sharpshooter moves north?
Well, I hope that the populations there don't ever affect Lodi, or I've failed miserably, or things have changed. We are primarily trying to do multiple things, including lessen the impact for those growers in Kern and Tulare, those grape growers. But something really important is trying to lessen that spread, because glassy wing is going to fly, especially when it's hot. Glassy wing will move readily to whatever is flushing and whatever is going on in the environment. So it may just find another citrus orchard next door that it's happy in, and it stays there. But as it creeps, it gets closer and closer to the northern front that we don't want it to jump. We don't want it to get to you guys. There are packing houses in Tulare County, and there are packing houses that are not in the infested area. So we don't want to jump glassy wing sharpshooter in bins of citrus to those new spots in those packing houses that then ends up infesting all around it, and it just keeps going. So I can't tell you, what's the rate of spread or anything like that. I don't have a good handle on that. I just know that this insect is really hard to contain. And there are significant inspection activities, both in bulk citrus and in nurseries going on, as well as treatments that are happening to try and keep this from everybody else in California. And I think a lot of folks just aren't aware of quite how much has been going on for 20 years of us funding this. The counties work really, really hard at trying to keep this contained.
Thank you. The next two questions are weather related. So it's kind of along the lines of, does cold weather in the foothills help us? Is it a fact that the glassy wing sharpshooter cannot survive in temperatures below freezing like we have here in Lodi?
We've had freezing temperatures even when I was living in Kern, multiple days. And what glassy wing does is it hunkers down in the grasses and stays protected. And then when the temperatures get back up to a feeding level, they'd start feeding again. So unfortunately, when we hoped we would see a lot of mortality because of freezing temperatures, we have not. Again, we've had infestations in Dixon. We've had infestations in Contra Costa County. We've had infestations in Sacramento County. So relying on that freezing, unfortunately, has not been something that has helped us. Something that used to help us, that has been documented by researchers, is that tule fog that we used to get really thick in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and maybe even up into Lodi. When I first lived in Bakersfield, those first 3 years, we had some thick tule fog. And what the tule fog did was keep temperatures at such a level for an extended period of days to where glassy wing then wasn't feeding, and then we would get mortality. So it was keeping the sun out of the sky and keeping it gray and horrible for us humans. But that ended up killing some glassy wing sharpshooters at lower levels. The foothills thing, I don't know how it would play out up here, but at least in Kern and Tulare, we actually see warmer temperatures up in the foothills of glassy wing kind of being protected in that citrus. So I don't like the foothill scenario of testing that any further than what we've seen. Kern County, the citrus kind of goes up along the foothills, and we end up having just horrible problems with glassy wing in those spots.
Thank you for that. From your perspective, how serious is the spotted lanternfly risk for the Lodi area?
And that was one thing I was going to add to my presentation, but then I was afraid of going too long. So I'm glad the question is asked. Spotted lanternfly scares me. And there has been significant damage on the East Coast. And my understanding is when it feeds, it's actually having such high numbers, it's killing the vine with its feeding. So it's not transmitting a disease. It's actually killing the vine. And here's why that pest scares me. So glassy wing sharpshooter, we have a yellow panel trap. It's not a blunder trap. I hear people say that and it drives me crazy. It is actually a visual lure for the insect. It likes that yellow color. It will fly to that yellow panel trap. We don't have a trap for spotted lanternfly right now. So any management program, the first thing you want is a really good trap to know where the insect is and where it isn't. The other thing is treatments for it. There are some good chemicals. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, there are chlorpyrifos is one, and there are things we can't use in California now that are effective against spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly is a different beast right now of knowing what to do for it and how to detect it. That I'm really nervous about that for California, and because it's the egg masses are like this muddy mass that can move on rail cars, it can move on pallets, it can move on, you name it. So it's that artificial spread of being able to control that and then being able to detect where it is. Tree of Heaven is a primary host. We've got Tree of Heaven all over the place in California. That one scares me. Yeah.
Excellent response. Okay. Well, so I have two more questions here on spotted lanternfly and neonics. So I think now it's 1:45. Would it be okay? Do you mind just responding to the questions in the Q&A?
You bet.
Thank you so much. We are going to, thank you so much for posting those questions. That was a great Q&A session. Thank you, Beth, for answering them. We are going to move on to Contra. He is going to talk to us about the vineyard of the past, present, and future. How will we farm? And he is our UC Davis specialist in cooperative extension and viticulture. Take it away, Con.
All right, I unmuted myself. Well, rather than dwelling on the past, things are moving fairly rapidly. I'm going to focus more on the present and the future. So, as you know, the business is changing. It's changing very rapidly, and this is due to consolidation and attrition within our commodities. And this is mostly coming from vineyard size, and a lot of this acreage being farmed more and more by farm labor contractors, as the mom and pop businesses are are not moving on to the fourth generation. So with this size, the timeliness of cultural practices getting more difficult because we have a lack of a willing labor force, and the willing labor force is demanding a premium. So roughly about $18 an hour with the benefits is what we're looking at. And of course, people don't want to work in vineyards because of quality of life and socioeconomic factors. And also, vineyards are not in close proximity to population centers. People have to drive to vineyards to work at them. Land availability and cost is a problem. Access to water is a problem with SGMA coming in. This is going to limit the acreage expansion and attrition in vineyard businesses. And of course, with that comes in foreign competition where you can bring in ringers for about $1 a liter to compete with the San Joaquin Valley product. So we have an evolution towards spatial temporal management of vineyards. Presently, we're managing everything uniformly. This includes uniform vineyard and soil management. This includes bulk or composite vine and soil sampling. As you move along this continuum, we have an increasing resolution for measurement and treatment. So some growers are doing zone vineyard and soil management, which includes a stratified random sampling within zones or identifying zones. Future approaches will be more specific. That includes fine grid sampling, including sensing or scanning, which we will talk about towards the end of this talk. So as you move along this continuum, you're going to need more and more educated people to be working in these vineyards. And that's why the businesses are constantly evolving towards less and less people managing these large acreages. So we can do a lot of things mechanically in vineyards. I have been showing this slide for a bit, and this keeps changing and improving from my point of view. So if you were to focus on wine grapes, harvesting is essentially all done mechanically in California. A lot of our acreage is pre-pruned by machine. Some people are doing final pruning in one pass with box hedging. There's a lot of canopy management that's been done by machines, especially leaf removal, and hedging has always been done by a machine. Some people are doing shoot removal and shoot positioning, and some folks are doing crop load management with machines as well. The ones that I have identified here with asterisks: dormant pruning, shoot removal, leaf removal, berry cluster thinning. These have all been, studied extensively, and I will show you some slides to that effect. We can also sense things in our vineyards. That's the, flavor of the decade now. We can sense a lot of things, such as the surface area of vineyards. We can sense plant populations, disease status, mineral nutrition. We are trying to sense yield. We're trying to sense water status, but soil properties. For wine grapes, we can sense that very reliably. As far as canopy components goes, we can sense biomass very reliably, water status, mineral nutrition, yield components at this point is still in development. Some developments have been made in other commodities, but it depends on the willingness of the commodities to work with these approaches. There's also a shift towards non-positioned systems. A lot of the vineyards we're seeing now are going in as high quads, and these high quads are essentially two single high wire vineyards with a giant T on top that can allow the canopy to sprawl, and also position the shoots by separating them horizontally. Of course, as new vineyards are being planted, we're seeing the effects of avoidance of heat waves or overexposure by changing the direction of the rows towards about a 45 degree from true north to distribute the heat load on the berries equally, as opposed to the north-south or northeast southwest rows that we used to plant. There's some adaptability as we're moving on in our business. A lot of our acreage is still in California sprawl, vertically shoot position systems. They're somewhat isolated to the coast now. What we're seeing mostly now being put in is quad systems and single high wires, and that is not by chance. When we look at the adaptability of these trellises, such as pre-pruning, final pruning, shoot thinning, leaf removal, berry and cluster thinning, trunk suckering, and harvest, quads and single high wire are very adaptable. They have been developed for these purposes. And unfortunately, we're seeing less and less head train vines as the business is evolving towards more no boots in the ground type of viticulture. When we look at the newer trellis systems, we're seeing the single high wire system, a 62 to a 66 inch tall canopy. It's a single canopy. It's not shoot position. You have about 35% exposed leaf area with tall vines. I'm not going to call them uber vines, although I just did. We can usually get to a production in about 18 months. So we're seeing about 11 to 24 tons to the acre, depending on which region you're in, which cultivar you're working with, in a 7 by 10 foot planting density. High quads are about 68 inches tall to the top of the second tee, 36 to 48 inch cross arm. This is also not shoot position, but we doubled the exposed leaf area. Production, again, you can get in about 18 months. 14 to 32 tons to the acre. These ones we're putting in a 6 foot by 11 foot planting density to accommodate the gondolas. High efficiency production systems. You guys have seen this in Lodi very well. Single high wires, as the name suggests, you have a single wire that's held by a super stake, and these stakes are beveled to deflect the wind. This is the vineyard we had put in at like Fresno State. It's about 20 acres in size, and it came into production beautifully. It settled at like 14 tons with a column bar. High quads are a little bit more complex. As you can see, you have the 24-inch cross arm and the top tee. As you lay the shoots down here, the idea is that they will grow and then sprawl out of the top of the tee, creating two distinct canopies. Again, these can be pruned, harvested, managed mechanically with ease. We have also, put in a show vineyard at Oakville Station. This was planted in 2016. This is in the famed Tocolon district in Oakville, California. We got the first crop in this one in 2018. It's a single high wire system. We have never done any handwork with this vineyard. It's quite dense by USA standards, 5 feet by 6 feet 4 inch spacing. It's a clone 8 of Cabernet on a 3309 rootstock. This has been a consistent producer at 13 tons to the acre in Napa County, and I have not been run out of Napa yet, so people are quite interested in this system. So how we manage these things, of course, dormant pruning is achieved mechanically. We make a 4-inch hedge, one pass, final pruning. Bearing height at this location was based on a previous year crop load, and we're set at a Ravaz index or a pruning to a yield ratio of 8 pounds of fruit per pound of pruning weight at this location. And you can make the same plant year after year if you manage your irrigation mineral nutrition correctly in these cases. Shoot removal, we do remove about 30% of the shoots mechanically here. Otherwise, it does, fruit itself to death. We apply this at a 6 to 8 inch stage. Main goal is to control cropping in this case. Like I mentioned, we remove about 30 shoots of the 30% of the shoots in this location. Of course, this is not by chance. This work was done about like 10 years ago. We're now applying it. Our yield averages when we did this work with a flopping variety, Syrah on a 1103P, we compared hand-pruned vines to mechanically pruned vines with different shoot densities, different mechanical shoot thinnings, and different irrigation restriction, sustained deficit, early season deficit, and a late season deficit. The sweet spot back then when we were doing this work was about 12 tons to the acre. And then that was achieved by a 4-inch hedge and shoot thinning to 7 shoots per foot of row with early season irrigation restriction with Syrah. But of course, this work was done 10 years ago with 7 by 11 spaced vineyards. Of course, the critical thing in mechanically managing vineyards is to maintain the plant at the same size year after year. And a good bellwether is pruning weight. This can be measured by kilograms or pounds of pruning weight per meter of row. The sweet spot in San Joaquin Valley is between 0.8 to 1 kilogram. Between 0.6 to 0.8 pounds of pruning weight per foot of weight. And that was, again, with a crop load mid, which was a mechanical box pruning with 7 shoots per foot of row with early season irrigation restriction. If I irrigate them to about 80% of crop ET replacement, I will devigorate them, but I can invigorate them by balancing with pruning and shoot thinning and irrigation restrictions. So this is 1 year of pruning weights. This is the 2nd year of pruning weights, showing that I make the same plants year after year. Of course, this has an effect on berry composition and quality. Again, crop load mid has the highest anthocyanins, tannins with early season irrigation restriction, and this is consistent. And then the complaint we were getting initially when we started mechanization work was green flavors. It's not a concern at all. When we look at methoxypyrazines in red wine that's mechanically managed with a shoot thinning and mechanical pruning, hand pruned vines actually make a lot of methoxypyrazines. They also make a beta damascene, which is the fruit forward flavor. However, the fruit forward flavor is not enough to overcome it in the hand pruned vines. If you do not make the green flavors in the mechanically pruned vines, you're going to end up with a lot of fruit forward flavors in this case. So it's really not a concern in this day and age. Of course, not everyone's going to start a vineyard from scratch. We converted a lot of vineyards in San Joaquin Valley. This was a head-trained vineyard, head-trained Merlot vineyard that we converted to a California sprawl or a single high wire mechanically pruned vineyard. At the end of 3 years, even though we lost some yield during the conversion year, single high wire was the most economically sustainable one compared to the head trained vines. And this publication is open source. I'll make the presentation available. You can check it out later if you have time. Berry cluster thinning is also done mechanically, but I need to say this. We see the most beneficial response if this is applied when berries are BB size. Post-veraison applications of berry or cluster thinning by machine is usually self-gratifying. It does not have any physiological benefit. Manual cluster thinning is cost prohibitive, but mechanical fruit thinning, we have done this in a Lodi area quite a bit. However, this requires a very rigorous crop estimation. Like I mentioned, this is most beneficial at BB size. Post-veraison applications, in our case with Cabernet, have not worked in our Lodi area. The way we set this up was beater bars were set 1 foot below the fruiting zone. We traveled at 1.6 miles an hour at forward speed at 470 RPMs. And this has removed the amount of crop that we were, hoping to remove, roughly about 25% to balance the crop. Of course, effect of cluster numbers, canopy variables, and our fruit composition is still up for debate. The most thing that we see with a cluster removal or a berry removal is an immediate increase in our total soluble solids accumulation. Rest of the stuff we don't not see a whole lot of benefit in the warm climates. Leaf removal is done mechanically. Like I mentioned, about 65% of our acreage is using machines to remove leaves. The cost is between $80 to $250 an acre, depending on trellis type, hand versus machine, of course, and of course, canopy density. We have lots of equipment available. The initial implements were suck and cut type of leaf removal implements. These were mostly adapted to VSPs. They did not work well on sprawling canopies. We have tried air blast type of leaf removal implements. Again, these were mostly adapted to VSP trellis. It did not work for us under our trials in the San Joaquin Valley. And you need a huge tractor to pull them, about an 80 horse tractor to pull them. Rollover type of implements have worked very well. They're adapted to a VSP, sprawling or split type of canopies, because you can push these into the wall of leaves. And they're somewhat selective due to this baffle that you see here. And you can even do a pre-bloom leaf removal with these with great ease. And here's the type that we used. This is when we were trying to do this on a head-trained canopy. They have this sickle bar that you can offset it by about 4 inches to get rid of a portion of the sprawl. And you can put it into the canopy and then open up your window to expose the leaf, to expose the clusters early in the season. Leaf removal, we studied quite extensively in San Joaquin and Stanislaus counties. Both pre-bloom and post-fruit set leaf removal works very well if the canopies are dense. However, they need to be combined with water deficits to get rid of the overpopulation or vegetative compensation in this case. In either case, you're going to see an increase in anthocyanin composition in grapes if that's what you're after. Some economic data on mechanical leaf removal. So this was controlled pre-bloom, post-fruit set leaf removal with sustained deficits or regulated deficits. Everything was pruned the same. Leaf removal cost is roughly about $70 an acre using a machine. And irrigation applied will change. So the last two columns, total skin anthocyanin production per acre or a hectare or a unit cost to grow anthocyanins. This was for wine grape in Stanislaus County. I can do nothing and farm it the same way that I have always done. I can not do any leaf removal in this case, irrigate it. I'm going to spend about $1.56 to make 1 unit of anthocyanin. I can change the irrigation. I can reduce my production cost, or I can do the leaf removal combined with regulated depth irrigation, cut my anthocyanin production cost in half. This, of course, comes with the double the amount of anthocyanin production per acre. So these results are very consistent in the San Joaquin Valley. However, in hot regions, as the regions start getting hotter, as we do these trials, we're seeing that leaf removal is reducing gross income. Shoot removal is reducing income per hectare or acre even further. Leaf removal and shoot thinning is removing it even further. And as the regions keep getting hotter, anthocyanin productivity will decline. Of course, likewise, the time or the cost to degrade methoxypyrazines in this case is also going to increase as the climate keeps warming. Warm and hot regions have heat wave damages. We came up with this rating scheme when we compared artificially shading them versus irrigating them even more. You cannot throw enough water onto grapevines to dissipate the heat from heat wave damages. All the exposed grapevines had tremendous amount of damage, no matter how much water we threw on them. So these things will all become a problem as we move on. As you look at spatial variability in vineyards, we have been studying this since about 2015 across California. A lot of the relationships that we're finding are related to soil variability. Of course, this equipment, this method has been available for quite some time, but not a whole lot of it has been transferred into knowledge. Geonics EM38, this equipment is ubiquitous in a lot of land preparation companies that may survey lands in California. So this was used when we were setting up trials, studying this. What we're finding out that grapevine plant water status is consistently variable across vineyards. So this is a stem water potential at the no-touch vineyard at Oakville. It's essentially divided in half because of the soil variability. And this is consistent 75 to 70% of the time over the course of the life of the vineyard. And this is related to the deep soil electrical conductivity. And this soil electrical conductivity can be turned into knowledge by harvesting these vineyards differentially, and it makes a difference in anthocyanin content of the fruit. And now we have reported this in quite a few publications. You can sense this. This can be sensed and applied to very large acreages. This work was completed in Sonoma, Napa, San Joaquin, and Tulare counties. Results are all similar. The reason crop load varies across large acreages is because of soil's ability to supply water later on in the season. You can turn these colorful maps into knowledge. We have made this calibration available in the publication. This is also open source. So you can take this soil electrical conductivity that you're measuring and convert it into a texture. And then this texture map can then be used to set up, irrigation sets or monitoring sets or differential harvesting sets for sake of argument. The question I constantly get is, do these differences affect canopy performance? These colors may look different. My eye tells me they should be different, but mathematically, physiologically, they were found not to be different in a variety of publications. Again and again, what we find in hot climates is that what is different is the water status, and this is the reason why zones in vineyards behave differently. Perspectives and future work with this. When I was in Fresno, we studied this quite a bit, and actually this work was done in Lodi. Selective harvest by mechanical means is available. These maps are consistent throughout the life of the vineyard. So you can program an oxbow harvester, essentially a raisin harvester, to follow a map to put fruit from different zones into different gondolas. Of course, this map can also be used for variable irrigation delivery. You can also set up stations to continuously monitor soil water, and smart monitoring via wireless mesh networks is also available. The other question we get is, what about yield estimation? This is the final frontier. When combined with yield monitoring, this would give more control to the grower. Various approaches have been tried. NDVI versus GDD accumulation. This is not really scalable under our conditions because our vineyards are all over the place, very different trellises. NDVI zoning and stratified sampling. This is not scalable due to the number of samples that have to be collected. Robotic Vision, we worked with it for about 3 years. The problems that we had with it was occlusion. We have a new trial now with this experimental plan, computer vision with a startup from Stanford. The computer vision works by various cameras in this case that will identify a cluster. It'll count the number of clusters per vine. As the cluster numbers per row, draws a predicted cluster map per row, draws a predicted yield per block map. So this trial is still in its infancy. The calibration trial has worked out quite well, looking at the side of the both sides of the vineyard. So we have a good agreement between what we're counting versus ground truthing. Of course, the error still is related to the leaf area to fruit ratio of these vineyards. So occlusion is still something that has to be overcome. What we will most likely to see, mechanical pruning will be common. Mechanical canopy management will be very common. Mechanical harvest is already common, but differential harvest more than likely be common as we have our logistics in order. Repetitive tasks, they'll move to co-robots and unmanned vehicles, such as spraying with GUS automation that almond growers are using. Tillage with the Monarch tractor, these will be commonplace. Sensor-driven decision-making is common. A lot of people have a surface renewal in their vineyards to measure actual ET. So irrigation design, irrigation delivery, depending on the energy pricing policies in California, will more than likely be sensor-driven. So with that, thank you for your attention. I think I have some time, right?
You do. You have time. You did great. We have a couple of minutes left, but then also we have 10 minutes for Q&A. So we do have a couple of questions in the question and answer, and I'm just going to speak them over to you, Con. So thank you for that presentation. With large cross arm and wire blocking access to the quotes inside art of the vine, how is a quadrilateral rated a 3++ for finished pruning? I would not rate it that way given no access to 25% of cordon.
We have let me back up. So I've been working with these guys since I arrived in California. Of course, the company changed hands numerous times. So the last iteration of the quad pruner uses the sprawl pruner, and we can get in there quite well. And we have some videos in this new pub that we're trying to put out through Catalyst as an open source publication to this effect. So it does get in there, but then again, the head has to open and close around the post. But we have designed these vineyards now that there's a cross arm every 5 vines, and the rest is just like trained onto the wire. So commonly, we're seeing more and more half-mile rows going, 0.75 acre rows going in. So every 5 vines, the head has to open and close, as opposed to the old California sprawl, where we would open and close it essentially every head. So it's still much more efficient than it used to be in the past.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The second
I should have put the video, but I forgot.
We do have time if you happen to have it on hand.
Yeah, it's going to take a million minutes to spool on my great internet connection at Oakville.
Understandable. So in the no-touch vineyard, with spacing so tight between rows, do you have problems with access for tractors, sulfur, and spray? Any shade out from one row to the next?
No, we don't. So the vineyard is actually 1.5 meters by 2 meters. So it's an odd spacing, but I wanted to do it that way because I could. We wanted to do it that way to show what's possible in this climate in Napa. So it's quite warm, and there's not a whole lot of need to do a lot of canopy management in this region. So shading out from row to row is not a concern. And if you look at our most recent publications, the biggest concern in Napa right now is degradation of anthocyanins and flavor compounds because of overexposure and heat waves. So we have another trial here where we're comparing 6 different trellises. In each case, as we run these, high quad and a single high wire has overperformed the VSP, all that so-called relaxed VSP that they have put in. So things have changed very rapidly, and looks like this will be the way to go. Now, of course, we're using vineyard tractors, these Kubotas, the M series. When you can push those tires into about like 1.3 meters, there's no access problem.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to just ask a big picture question. With the future, I know in a variety of crops, we're always wondering with the increase in temperatures, we're looking at different varieties, we're looking at different options. Do you see a shift in the varieties of grapes that will be grown in certain places, or more of a way to deal with the increase in temps and keep growing what we're growing?
You have to step back 500 years why we're growing the varieties that we grow, right? So there's a reason why Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc ruled the world. And that's because of international trade. So if we don't grow it here, it'll be grown somewhere else, and that's how things work. What we will see is more blenders coming in. If you roll back the clock in California to before Prohibition, we grew all these autochthonous varieties, the so-called Italian or Greek varieties. We grew a lot of Barbera, we grew a lot of Palomino, so on and so forth. But we were not really able to add value to our crop until we switched over to our growing, international varieties. You have to keep in mind where these autochthonous varieties come from. If you travel the Apulia or the boot heel of Italy, no vineyards are more than 60 kilometers from the sea, so they have the marine influence. Fresno, Lodi is nowhere near the sea, so we did these things. So our approach should be to breed better varieties that'll take the heat to blend into these. So Andy Walker and I have just put in a trial at Oakville. His red varieties that he developed for PD resistance never quit making sugar. Since they never quit making sugar, they never quit making anthocyanin. Usually the true grapevines, Uvitis, stop making anthocyanin at 21 bricks. So if you hang them at like 25 bricks, in Lodi, you're going to lose 60% of anthocyanins. So take a lot of these things, consultants say, with a grain of salt. But breeding will probably keep the business alive.
Thank you for that. Well, I have one more question. In your work with zone-based management of vineyards, have you done any work surrounding variable rate fertilizer or other input application, liquid or dry? If so, what were the results of that work?
Yes, we did that with gypsum. And gypsum is the most commonly used supplement that's usually going to be applied. The economy of it is not there. It was not there for us when we did the work. Of course, we see a physiological benefit, and we see a pedological benefit in the top 3 foot of the soil. We do see the benefit on the plant. However, the business case is not there for a lot of the supplements that we apply, because it's cheap. Your cost is still someone driving up and down the road. Someone still has to drive, and that's $100 an acre. So that's where we did not see the, yes, there's a physiological benefit, but there's no business case.
Understandable. Well, thank you, Khan, and thank you to the questions that were popping up in the Q&A. I think if we don't have any more questions, what we can do is we can go to break a little bit early. And I say we just take an 8-minute break and meet back here at 2:30, and we will talk about the aspects of vineyard weed management. And Kamyar will take over as our moderator. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the break. Bye, Khan.
How do I stop my?
Okay, we'll be getting started in just a moment. At 2:30, I'd like to thank Kari Arnold for nicely moderating the first session. Again, my name is Kamyar Aram. I am the crops advisor for the East Bay counties of Contra, Costa, and Alameda County, where I cover grapes among many other crops. And we're going to continue with our great lineup for you this afternoon, starting with Dr. Anil Shrestha, professor of weed science at Fresno State University, who is going to tell us about aspects of vineyard weed management. Yeah, this is a presentation with DPR credits, so pay attention, and there will be a poll right at the end before the question and answer session that we'll cover. With that, welcome Dr. Shrestha, and over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers and Kari Arnold for the invitation, and also thank the audience for your attendance here. I'm going to talk about weed management, and I was just listening to Khan's talk there about future of vineyards and how the future vineyards are going to look like. I think I can guarantee you that there are going to be weeds in the future, in the unforeseeable future. So what I'm going to do is give you a broad overview of my years here at Fresno State. And before Fresno State, I was with the UCCE IPM program working with weeds. So I've been around for almost 20 years in the Valley trying to deal with weeds. And I haven't solved anything yet. And when you look at weeds, the main things that come up is these compete with the grapevines for water, light, and nutrients. That's like a textbook definition, right? And then it's also an alternate host for diseases, pathogens, nematodes, insects, and even vertebrate pests. And they interfere with irrigation, harvest, spray equipment, and all kinds of other cultural operations. But end of the day, we were talking about yield loss, loss in quality, and the economic costs associated with these weeds and the interference with various cultural practices. So when I see something like this, this is around the Fresno area. I mean, when you spend so much time in putting in a vineyard and buying all those grapevines, I think there should be some effort in taking out the weeds. So here's a very serious competitive situation. And they're all grasses, which are even more competitive than broadleaf weeds. So yes, the weeds do compete for water, nutrients, and light if this is the situation. But then the other things we don't really talk about too much is these weeds are a host for many diseases. For example, Xylella was found to be hosted by 27 weed species, and some of the common ones that we see in the Valley are like on that list, like sunflower, cocklebur, morning glory, horseweed, datura. So these are all around, and they are known to be hosting the Xylella disease vectors. And another one I found from Spain is where they looked at root knot nematode, again, hosted by weeds. And I selected some of the common ones that we have in the Valley: redroot pigweed, oxtongue, goosefoot, fillery, cheeseweed, white mustard, black nightshade. These are all common weeds in our systems. So I haven't seen a study with the association of weeds and nematodes in California directly in vineyards, but there are studies out of New Mexico as well from other systems which talk nematodes. And then mealybugs, Kent's work and Dane's work, he has shown that they can host these weeds such as cheeseweed, burr clover, nightshade, south thistle, lamb squatters, bindweed, yellow rocket. These are all common weeds, and they are a host for mealybugs. So again, some of the aspects that we don't really see or hear of directly when we talk about weed management, we basically don't really think about the other aspects, the holistic aspects of weeds. So they are causing quite a fair bit of damage. And then if you have a weedy vineyard, we've noticed, this is studied by Kurt Hembry, who recently retired, and he was able to document all kinds of vertebrate pests in the vineyard when you had a weedy situation. So when you go back to history and integrated weed management, it was first discussed in 1981. So it's not anything new. We talked about integrating physical, chemical, and biological, cultural methods for integrated weed management long time ago. But once the chemical era came in and the success of the herbicide, especially glyphosate, and the economics behind it, the efficacy of the herbicides, we kind of put integrated weed management to the side. But then slowly we are now re-emphasizing integrated weed management. So the question is, what are the challenges in recent years, and why are we again talking about integrated weed management after so many years? So the issue is, the major issue is this. We have, I checked this list this morning, we have about 515 resistant biotypes of weeds, 263 species, 152 broadleaves, and 111 grasses. And out of the 26 herbicide sites of action we have, 23 of them have reported cases of herbicide-resistant weeds. There's only like 3 herbicide modes of action that don't have any new, any reported case of resistant weeds. And it's just a matter of time, I think. And the downside is we don't have any new mode of action coming out for the foreseeable future. There's 1 or 2 on the pipeline that's being discussed, but it'll be a while before they come out. So this list seems to be growing, 94 crops in 71 countries. Locally, like when you talk about, what causes herbicide resistance, it's the selection pressure. In one single sentence, it's the repeated use of the same herbicides that causes selection for resistant weeds. I was looking at the list for California. We have about 30 biotypes of herbicide-resistant weeds. Most of them seem to be from the rice systems from the Sacramento area and north. But those were older cases. The newer cases that are quite disturbing is the cases of herbicide-resistant weeds in vineyards and orchards. So if you look at the list, these are the herbicides that have reported cases of herbicide-resistant weeds. ALS inhibitors would be something like matrix family. Then your ACCase inhibitors would be your grass herbicides. PS2 inhibitors would be your simazine type of herbicides. Auxins would be your 2,4-D. Glyphosate would be your Liberty, Rely, and glyphosate, and then paraquat. So these are like some of the herbicide that have cases of resistance in our state. And if you look at the registered herbicides for grapes, we seem to have quite a good list, and both for bearing and non-bearing, pre and post-emergence. I looked at the list, and it's about 15 out of the 26 modes of action that we have. And but then if you narrow it down, and based on the popular choices, people seem to use the same herbicide again and again. So although it looks like a lot of herbicides are there for our choices, but the ones that I have with asterisk already have a reported case of herbicide-resistant weeds. So if you look at this list, we don't have any mode of action that does not have a case of resistant weed, and internationally. Now, it doesn't mean we have it locally, but it's just a matter of time. So the question then is, how does resistance occur? And I said earlier that it's because of the repeated use of the same herbicide. And most commonly, it's the selection pressure. So in a field, there is a chance that there is a weed that has that herbicide-resistant gene in it. You spray it with an herbicide, all the susceptible ones die, and the one that has the resistant weed survives. It produces seeds, and then the seeds go back to the seed bank, and then there are a little more resistant weeds the next year, and then you come back with the same herbicide, and you're starting with this, little more herbicide-resistant weeds, but then you come back with the same herbicide, and then you spray that population, and the process repeats itself. So you get rid of all the ones that had the susceptible gene, then you select for the ones that had the resistant gene in it, and those are going to multiply. And ultimately, in year 3, year 4, you are going to have a population where all your where you have selected for all the resistant ones to be there. So this is like a simple form of how resistance occurs. And down here in the Fresno area, we have fleabane, which is now resistant to both paraquat and glyphosate. And I'm testing the same population. I'm testing for the resistance to a third mode of action, a PPO inhibitor. So it won't be too long when I would see that, this has developed resistance to 3 different herbicides. And the next one I think would be glufosinate, based on the pressure we have, with glufosinate being applied as an alternate to Roundup. In Australia, they have a ryegrass, which is now resistant to 11 modes of action. And even in California, we have ryegrass that's resistant to 4 different modes of action: ACCs, ALS, EPSP would be your glyphosate, and PS1 inhibitors. So when we talk about herbicides, it's about maximizing herbicide efficacy. So if you're dealing with pre-emergence herbicides, you have to remove the debris. You have to have enough water to activate herbicide, avoid the frequent wetting and disturbance of soil. And if you're working with post-emergence, timing is critical. And we are learning now that volume is also critical. Spray deposition, nozzle selection, adjuvants, water quality, minimizing drift. These are all important. And debris can interfere with herbicide efficacy when you're applying pre-emergence herbicides. And I was doing a study on campus this year. That's the amount of foliage I had on the floor. So I had to vineyard floor. So I had to clean these. And this was a study with Allion, which seems to have fairly good promise, and with low amounts and long residual activity. So I had to clean all the berms before applying the herbicide. Then we've had a dry spell. So when you have a dry spell, the herbicide is not activated, and then you lose that herbicide. So adequate moisture is needed to activate those pre-emergence. It may mean some sort of a mitigation. But then again, if you frequently wet the soil and disturb the soil, that will lead to rapid herbicide degradation. So you don't want to have frequent wetting as well. Now these are with pre-emergence herbicides. Now, when it comes to post-emergence herbicides, this is something that we've been emphasizing over and over again, that size of the weed, growth stage is really important. Many times I get calls that, the weed is resistant, can you come out and check? And it's mostly a case where the herbicide was applied too late and the weed was too big for the post-emergence herbicides to do anything to it. So there are old studies. In fact, one of my predecessor in UCIPM did this work a long time ago, where he looked at the efficacy of glyphosate on horse feed based on growth stage. And 10 means 100% control. When he applied it at 2 to 14 leaf stage, he got 100% control. But look what happens as the herbicide is applied later at the rosette stage and at the bolting stage, your efficacy is reduced by almost 30%. And here's a picture showing that. And this has been the case in my studies as well. Anything beyond the rosette stage or even at the rosette stage, you start to see misses with herbicides, especially when it comes to fleabane and meristale. And this is Kurt Hembry's data. He did a really good job in showing that the volume, spray volume matters when it comes to weeds like horseweed and fleabane. And he got the best control with very little regrowth when he went with 40 to 50 gallons per acre. So Kurt was always a proponent of going with high volume instead of 30 or 20. So with these glyphosate type of herbicides, 40 or 50 seems to do the job well. And here's a picture of that. And also the nozzle types make a difference. And I'll show you some pictures. This is a turbo with 40 gallons, turbo twin jet with 40 gallons and 50 gallons. So pretty good coverage and good control. So here's an example of glufosinate on willow herb. This is at 15 gallons per acre. You see that you've got almost 50% escapes. And then the same amount, the same rate at 30 gallons per acre, and totally control all of the weeds. So I think going higher volumes with herbicides like glyphosate and glufosinate is a good strategy. And the reason is this. So when you look at a contact type of herbicide or a systemic type of herbicide, systemic doesn't matter that, like if you have a few droplets and they go into the system. But if you have a contact type of herbicide, you have to have good coverage. And if you think about fleabane, it's a pretty stemmy plant with narrow leaves and few leaves. So you have to have good coverage for the material to work on it. And he also looked at, this is all, again, Kurt's data. He looked at the difference between the nozzles and he got better control of less regrowth when he went with the twin jet. In the case of twin jet, you're attacking the weed from both sides and you're getting a good coverage. So, not a huge difference, but then again, if that changing the nozzle can give you that much of a difference, I think it's good information to have. So these are with hay, fleabane, and horseweed that he did his studies. So again, I should also mention that with systemic, it's not the case. This is more of a contact. And well, for systemic, even glyphosate would be a systemic. So yeah, even with glyphosate, he went with the higher volume. So again, I've heard people say there's no weed that is resistant to steel, but I kind of beg to differ. That if you use the same tactic, you will select for weeds that will adapt to that system. No matter if you go with a French plow or a cultivator, you will have weeds that slowly will adapt to that system. And here's some examples. This was a horseweed and hairy fleabane infested vineyard in Madera. And we went with a cultivator and we did a really good job, cleaned it up. And we were quite happy with the results. But when we did it continuously, by the third year, this is what we had done. We had shifted the population of fleabane and meristil to now nutsedge and grasses. So the cultivator favors these types of species. So whether you like horseweed or nutsedge is the question now, right? So the idea is not to go with the same tactic, even if it's in mechanical control. So here's a grower down in Kingsburg. He uses French plow all the time, and this is what he has: solid stand of Bermuda grass. And the sad thing is he's an organic grower and doesn't have many options. So he has to kind of live with it now, and that's what he's doing. And then we're always challenged with new weed species, and we have to understand the biology. Here's a viticulture specialist from Fresno State, quite happy with this new pigweed. Now this is not redwood pigweed, this is Kamyar Amaranth. Now Kamyar Amaranth was, we thought we wouldn't have much of a problem in California because it's more of a Midwest weed, and it's a problem in corn, soybean rotations where they have Roundup Ready systems, and this is Roundup Ready weed. So, but now we're seeing it in California. We're seeing it more commonly in vineyards, at least in this area, in Kerman and areas around Fresno. I don't know if it's the same case up in your area, but it's there. So, and I did some tests on these populations and they're resistant to glyphosate. You can see these populations. We went all the way up to 8x label rate and they survived. So we do have the population. I bet it is a Midwest population that has moved to California because we first saw it in the corn systems in Stanislaus, but now it's in vineyards as well. And the sad thing, again, it's also resistant to matrix, rimsulfuron. So it has resistance both to glyphosate and matrix. And we're doing a study on campus to see how competitive these can be in new vineyards. And you can see how competitive they are. You can barely see the grape vines and worse on this side. So we have this, and you may want to watch for it and not let it take over your vineyards. The other one is Mexican sprangle top, not resistant to glyphosate, but it is kind of hard to control with glyphosate. It is resistant in the Sacramento Valley to certain herbicides, not quite in vineyard systems yet. And then this Telegraph Weed has always been around. I've seen it in the middle. I don't know if it's really competitive, but it's something that's always been around. Very difficult. It's waxy. It's very difficult to control with post-emergence herbicides. Willow herb has always been around. Fluvalin has been around in the northern areas, not quite in our area yet. So when we talk about integrated weed management, it's not just the chemical, biological control that we talk about. We also talk about the biology and ecology of weeds, the critical periods. These are all components of integrated weed management or principles, enhancing crop competitiveness and weed thresholds. So I'll just discuss some of these points as they apply to vineyards. So the concept of a critical period for weed control was, initiated by these corn soybean people in the Midwest, where they believed that it was not necessary to control weeds in soybean or corn throughout the growing cycle. There was only a certain period in the life cycle of corn and soybean where it was absolutely necessary to remove weeds. Later, emerging weeds did not really cause damage to the yield or to the quality. So it was a concept developed for annual crops, but I think it also applies to perennial crops like grapevines, for example. So, and I'll talk about that. So the other thing that I get questions quite a fair bit is, what are the losses of, in terms of yield in vineyards? And I think the answer to that, it depends on the age of the vines and the life cycle stage of the vines, what time of the season they are there, what species. Not all weed species cause the same damage or yield losses. How long do they compete, and what densities they are there at. So these are some of the, so it's very difficult to say, okay, just because you saw some weeds, they're going to cause yield loss. It depends on so many of the other factors that I just pointed out here. So what I've seen from my own studies, and also Kurt Hembry, we worked on these aspects, is newly established grapevines, if it's less than 3 years old, they're very susceptible to weeds. And once you have established vineyard, like 3 years or older, they are more tolerant to weeds. So I did a greenhouse study to look at the competition between horseweed and grapevines. When I joined the UCIPM, it was all about horseweed. That's what we had. And we saw a lot, especially when the resin growers went out of, not out of business, but when the prices went down, they didn't really pay attention to the weed control, and horseweed was what we saw all over. So when I looked at the competition between the horseweed and grapevines just for 8 weeks in a greenhouse, just 8 weeks was enough to reduce above ground biomass by 85%. Cane length was reduced by 80%. Number of leaves were reduced by 75%, and root biomass was reduced by 80%. Now I know Khan always teases me that you do pot studies and find these kinds of data, but believe me, these have been replicated in the field, and we found the same results. So Kurt Hembry did this in the field with Steve Vasquez, and they had different treatments where they had some plots that were completely weed-free. Some plots, they let the weeds grow for three months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and 24 months after planting. So these were replicated studies at 5 points. And they basically found the same data that I did in terms of reducing cane length. And in my case, I looked at the roots as well, because it was easy for me to look at roots in a pot study, but they looked at the other things that I looked at. And here's the trunk diameter, trunk growth in a weed-free plot, 3 months of competition and 2 years of competition. That's like quite drastic in terms of the cane trunk growth. Pruning weights, you can see that weed free. There's quite a fair bit of pruning as opposed to 2 years of weed pressure, almost. That gives an example of, we did this data comparison, and it kind of correlated with my greenhouse study. And the other thing that they found was as your duration of weed presence increased in the vineyard, the damage from gophers and all other kind of vertebrate pests were pretty high. Then the next part of the question that I mentioned earlier is, okay, so how many weeds does it take to cause yield loss? So when I saw this near 99 and Manning in the Fresno County area, I often wondered, like, is the grower getting any yield at all? And I did talk to the grower, and he mentioned that didn't really see much yield loss. So it was difficult for me to believe that, this kind of weed pressure, no yield loss. So we did a study in a vineyard at Parlier with a 30-year Thompson seedless vineyard. And I've planted different densities of horseweed between the vines. And we went all the way from no horseweeds, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So this is like 50 horseweed plants between the vines. And I did this study for 3 years. And lo and behold, there was no decrease in yield at all. Now, I must put a disclaimer here that it was a flood irrigated vineyard and it was only horseweed. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the same in all species and in a drip system or another system. So the results may not apply to all weed species, but it still gives an indication that established vineyards have a higher tolerance for weeds. But then there are species that can cause more losses. So horseweed, I don't think is very competitive. Leaven doesn't seem to be competitive. It's more of an aesthetic nuisance and nuisance in terms of harvesting and other cultural operations. But if you have stuff like Johnson grass, barnyard grass, field bindweed, yes, these do cause up to 30% yield loss in a given year. So this is, again, as I mentioned, depends on weed species. So the idea is to start clean, and then the critical period should be like the first 2-3 years for established vineyards. Then again, the question comes, okay, should I let the weeds go to seeds? And this is the number of seeds that a single weed can produce in the millions in the case of common purslane. So we don't want seed return as well. And when I see this kind of a situation, this is again near Fresno with almost 60 or 70 acres of vineyard that was pulled out with all those fleabane and horseweed seeds flying around. And it's really easy for the seeds to move into a neighbor's vineyard. So managing weeds along the field edges is also an IPM strategy or integrated weed management strategy. Now there's a lot of other many hammers for weed control, and I'm not going to get into those. Cover crops is another one which most people are studying these days. Monterey Pacific Vineyards in King City is using cover crops before planting the vineyard, and they're doing it more from a soil health perspective, but it has implications for weed control. So we looked at some studies comparing French plow, Beziridis, steam, and organic herbicides in vineyards in Madera and in Kingsburg. We looked at weed control, crop growth, water potential, crop yield, and quality. That's untreated control. With French plow, we got almost like season-long weed control. And then the bad part was like it caused some damage to the vine roots, but I don't know what it means in the long term. Beziridis, we got 70% weed control for 3 months. And it basically undercuts the weeds. So if you have species that, like grasses, and if you have irrigation right after running the Beziridis, they'll come back. So with the mechanical control, it's possible to control bigger weeds, as you can see there. But the thing is, if it's too wet, it's difficult to enter the vineyard. If it's too dry, it's dusty and it takes more time. So steam, I'm going to write off steam, and I think Khan will agree with me. But one of my prior graduate students, he's working with STEAM again in Oregon, and he says, you know, you can do reasonable control with $45 per hour costs and then all that adds up. It's almost like $224 per acre. And he says it's cheaper than organic herbicides. But again, with STEAM and herbicides, timing is critical. Organic herbicides, we have a lot of hit and miss, and we didn't really have good results. So when it came to crop yield and quality, no effect on wine grape yield with these treatments, no effect on any of the quality parameters we tested, no effect on water potential in both vineyards. So again, established vineyards have a higher threshold for these weeds. Okay? So this is also pruning weight, no effect. And we did the math, and with STEAM, we're looking at $132 to $150 an acre. Best ZDDs 50, less than 50. Organic herbicides can be pricey. And what we recommended to some of the vineyards in this area is 2 passes of cultivator, April and June. It looks like about $20 to $25 per acre. Does a fairly good job, but then again, you want to rotate it with other aspects. Now, I also get questions on, now, since everyone is moving to remote sensing and drone technology.
Interrupt for a second. Sorry,
Yes.
and we're at the end of the time. There are no questions. So I think I'll go ahead and let you.
All right. So I'm almost done, two slides. So, you know, they talk about these remote sensing, and some of these have pretty good resolution, and you can see the weeds and even identify them. But my question is like, you know, we got to move beyond that. You know, yes, it tells me where the weed is and what it is. And so what is the question? Okay, how do I get rid of them? So we got to move to that kind of technology. And slowly it's coming. We have these robotic weeders and all that's coming. So weed biology and ecology are important in integrated weed management. You don't want to use the same tactic again and again, and multiple tactics have to be used. So that's like in a nutshell of my work here in the last 20 years. And there's a lot of people to thank in this series of experiments that we did. So with that, I'd like to end my talk and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Anil. And so I think this is a time we'll bring up the poll. Many more. Well, I think we can go ahead and review these questions, Anil, when you're ready.
Okay, so the first one is, all weeds cause equal yield losses to grapes, and the answer is false, because as I said, like some of the weed species don't really do much damage to the grape yield. And they look menacing, but they don't really decrease yield. Weeds cannot adapt to mechanical control systems. And I think I showed the slides where grasses, like Bermuda grass and nutsedge, they can adapt to mechanical control systems if you use the same method over and over again. So the answer to that is false. Surface residue in the grape row can reduce efficacy of some pre-emergence herbicides. It is true, because some of the herbicides can be tied to the residue, to the debris on the surface, and they cannot do their job. So it is better to have cleaner berms than berms that have residue or debris in them.
Great, thank you. We do have some questions that came in. So moving on to them. First question is, any experience with flaming of weeds? You know that.
Yeah, so in one of my treatment, we had flaming as well. Flaming, steam, these are the same kind of results. So you have to come back every 3 weeks or so. If it's grasses, the flaming does not do much because the growing points are very close to the surface of the soil. Broadleaves, you can get them. Again, the concept is similar to herbicides. Growth stage, size of the weed does seem to make a difference in flaming as well.
Great, thank you. And the second question was this, also about flaming weeds. So we'll move to the third one. what mechanical methods would be applicable for a small organic vineyard? And I know you mentioned a few things about cultivation, but any more?
Yeah. Yes. For an organic vineyard, again, even if you have mechanical tools, I would say you'd have to have at least two to go back and forth with. If you, the Beziridis cultivators, the French plows, are, well, a French plow would not be possible if you don't have a raised berm, but if you go with the cultivators, the depth of the cultivator can make a difference. So if you have shallow type of cultivators like the Beziridis, it works fine for certain weed species, but then if you have the soil contact with the roots of these weeds, and then if you have a rain event or some irrigation event, those will grow back. So even with cultivators, you may have to have frequent kind of operations.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I have a question myself. Your very kind of provocative pictures of Palmer Amaranth made me fascinated about how you think that weed got into vineyards in California. I think you mentioned,
I think where it came from the dairy corn folks. And it might have come from seeds of corn, because we first noticed it in the Hilmar area. And this was like 7-8 years ago. And I thought or believed that it wouldn't really be a problem in vineyards, but now I'm seeing, like in recent years, I'm seeing more and more of Palmer Amaranth. And even water hemp to some extent in some vineyards in this area. I'm not sure what it is like up in the Lodi area, but we are seeing it in the Fresno area in vineyards.
Can you make any comments generally about how much concern you see about moving weeds from vineyard to vineyard?
Yes, with all the mechanical equipment that moves around with harvesting and all kinds of cultural operations, it's a possibility that weed seeds can move around from one vineyard to the other. The other thing I didn't mention is we also have noticed that weed seeds can come in with the irrigation system as well, because some of these canal banks are loaded with weeds and the seeds just go into the water. And if you don't have a good filtration system, the weed seeds can easily spread to the vineyards. That's how I think the Sprangletop moved to the orchards and vineyards, at least in this area, because you see them closer to the edges of the vineyards and orchards, and over the years they move in gradually.
Very well, thanks again. Thank you, Dr. Anil Shrestha, for very illuminating and presentation on weed management. We're going to go ahead and move on now to our next speaker, who is Dr. Anita Oberholster, a cooperative extension specialist in enology from UC Davis. And this, I know, has been a very busy summer and fall for her, as she'll be discussing grape smoke exposure risk and mitigation, which has become, I think, a concern in places that we did not anticipate in the past. Thank you for joining us, Anita, and I will give it over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. I had a little bit of technical issues this morning, so I'm using a headset that I usually don't use, but that's my backup plan. Let me quickly share my screen. So I was asked to talk about grape smoke exposure risk and mitigation. Now, obviously, this is a pretty irrelevant issue at the moment. And yes, definitely this year was unique in the fact that almost all wine grape growing regions were impacted in some way or form. I'm going to talk a little bit about the science, because you sort of have to understand what the problem is and the complexity of the problem to understand the potential mitigation, both in the vineyard and in the winery. I'm going to give an overview of both because the vineyard and winery is so interconnected, and it's really very good to understand both sides. And also telling you what we don't know and what we do know. And unfortunately, the caveat, there's a lot we don't know. And what we're currently working on so that we can help the industry better in future seasons. So I don't have to convince any of you, but climate experts and natural resource managers in general agree that the occurrence of wildfires, they will occur in higher frequency, with higher intensity, and do pose a significant risk to the wine grape grow regions of California, but actually the whole West Coast. And this risk is that the persistent exposure of smoke can impact the quality and value of wine grapes and compromise the quality of subsequent wines. Now, John Moramoko actually did an economic analysis of the potential impact of only the 2020 wildfires on the grape and wine industry. And his estimate is that the wine industry lost $3.7 billion only in wholesale value. That is only for 2020. This does not take related industries into account. I mean, just think of the tourism industry to give you an idea of how far-fetched this problem really is. We had 6 of the 7 largest wildfires occur in 2020 alone. So now I'm going to move back to the science. And first, I'm going to start with what's a wine taint. So the wine taint is something defined as something that comes from outside, overpowers the wine, and make it one-dimensional. So basically, it decreases the complexity of the wine, it overpowers it, decrease the quality. Now, when we talk about smoke taint, this is when you have a very characteristic smoky, burnt, campfire, medicinal, earthy aroma on the nose, and that is not an exhaustive list. You get a lot of other characters as well. But very distinctive for me is that lingering retronasal asterisk character that you perceive at the back of your throat. Sometimes it's a little bit more like a fresh campfire or old campfire, but is related characters to that. So where does this come from? During a wildfire, you have a lot of vegetation burning. Now, 15 to 25% of wood consists of lignin. That's what gives wood its structure. It's like the fiber, the crunch in your vegetable. If you look at the structure on the left, that is structure of lignin. Now, when it burns, you get thermal degradation. So it's basically breaking up into its individual parts. And that's when you can get a release of a massive amount of compounds that looks like that. A ring structure and a hydroxyl group, a OH group, that's a phenol. And they can have little different substitutions onto that ring. So that's an example of guaiacol. I think we've all heard about guaiacol by now. And so you can have a massive amount of these compounds being released during a wildfire. They can disperse with different temperature conditions, airflow. There's a lot of parameters that can influence how far they move. And they do break down in the atmosphere much faster than any particular matter that you see. So this is the thing that I will get into later, that smoke doesn't always equal smoke taint risk. Now, if you think about barrels, most winemakers want to put their wine in a barrel because it enhances the quality. When you toast a barrel, and yes, there at the top right, that's more like charring bourbon barrels, but when you toast a wine barrel, you're basically doing the same thing, but under controlled circumstances. You're releasing the same compounds. They're just not glycosylated, meaning it's only the free form. And at low levels, they can give you spicy, toasty, oaky aromas that actually add to the complexity of your wine. It's really a classic example of too much of a good thing is not a good thing anymore. Too much of it, and it has negative characteristics and overpower. All these compounds are also naturally present in grapes. You can get both the free and the bound forms in grapes. And different grape varieties have different natural amounts. We don't know how seasonal impacts influence the amount that you get in grapes. The varietal impact, we know different varieties have different natural amounts in the grapes without seeing any kind of smoke exposure. These compounds have no health risk. This is really only a quality question. Now, say you have a wildfire and there's smoke coming to your grapevine. What's happening now? When you have the air saturated with volatile phenols, they very quickly absorb through the berry skin. So they're not on the outside, they're inside the hypodermal cells, and they get glycosylated, meaning there's enzymes within the berry that very quickly attach sugars. So now you have your guaiacol, and it can attach 1 or 2 or 3 sugars to it. Now, guaiacol is just one example. We have many other volatile phenols being released, and they can all have a range of different sugars in different combinations attached to it to form bound forms. Now, we think this is part of the defense mechanism of the plant. So basically, you can see this is getting a little bit more complex. You have free forms, you have bound forms, and there's a smorgasbord now of potential compounds that can impact the quality of the grape and subsequent wines. Now, in the beginning, everybody only analyzed guaiacol and 4-methyl guaiacol. And where that came from is when Australia started their smoke exposure related research in the early 2000s. Those are the methods we had available looking at oak profiles. And they quickly realized that those two aren't enough to predict smoke taint development in the wine, and expanded it to at least these 7 compounds. But many of the researchers actually look wider than this, but those 7 have been shown to correlate with smokiness on the nose and other related smoke exposure characteristics. Now you also get the brown forms. Now the AWRI basically suggests you need to look at 6 bound volatile phenol glycosides. But obviously I just told you there's many more than that. A lot of researchers look at 20 to 40 of these different bound forms. But these 6 have been shown to correlate with smoke impact sensory characteristics. But we're continuing looking at whether we should expand the list of compounds that we are looking at to get better predictive power. So unfortunately, this is the kind of situation you can have. If you only measure the free, you may be measuring the tip of the iceberg. There may be all these bound forms underneath. Now, that's not always the case. We can't really predict this free to bound ratio. It seems to be dependent on the grape, on specific circumstances. We don't know if this is related to the time of exposure. These are all things we have to investigate further, but it's a potential. So that's why we have all these analysis methods. We have the free analysis, which is the easiest. Then you can look at the individual bound compounds. And if you look here, those are some of the compounds that the first researchers identified. And those highlighted in blue are the ones that those commercial labs that do look at individual bound compounds are actually analyzing. But there is more than that, right? So then others do, okay, there's such a long list. Let's do acid hydrolysis. What you do with acid hydrolysis, and then you give you a total number, is they basically change the pH of the sample to like 1 and 1.5. That's very acidic. And heat it to 100 degrees Celsius. So the heat in the acid breaks everything down, and you have everything in the free form, and then you measure that. But is that under or overestimation? Are you degrading some things and losing it? And are you releasing more than would ever release in the lifetime of the wine? We do not know. And we don't get mass balance, meaning if you look at the individual compounds, that doesn't add to the same amount as when you do acid hydrolysis. And these are all questions that still need answers. So enough of the chemistry. Let's look at the studies that have been done looking at the impact on the vine itself. So this is a very interesting research that they did in Australia. They looked at molar vines over 3 seasons, and they intentionally smoke exposed these vines at different key growth stages. You can see the different stages there, and found that, okay, as soon as you have a berry, you have some susceptibility to smoke exposure, but they were the most susceptible like a week after veraison. The thing here is that in the last very bad fire season in Australia as well, the 2019-2020 grape season, they found out that they had wineries or grapes that were only exposed to smoke, pea-size, rock-hard berries. And they actually were highly impacted by smoke exposure. Now they're saying basically, if you have a berry, unfortunately, you have some risk and you will have to do testing. The good news here is there is no carryover from one year to the next. The smoky compounds can absorb onto the leaves and they can absorb onto the grapes, but they don't overwinter. So next year, you're actually starting afresh. And the little bit of data that we do have about the impact on the health of the vine looks like the vine recovers pretty quickly if it didn't have any physical damage from heat or fire. Now, what happens in winemaking? Now, because these compounds are in the skins, as soon as you crush the grape, you start getting extraction. A lot of it is like costylated, so it's a little bit like anthocyanins. They extract very quickly because they're hydrophilic. They can dissolve in water pretty easily. They don't need alcohol. Now, in this study done on Merlot, they followed the extraction of volatile phenols, both free and bound, and 7 days were like they're 100% because they had only 7 days of contact. And basically, by day 5, they already had 80% extracted. So they extract very quickly. During this winemaking process, you get slow hydrolysis from the bound to the free because wine is actually an acidic medium. Now, in that Merlot case, they actually found to be after fermentation to after malolactic fermentation, so from primary to secondary fermentation, a 50% increase in the release of free volatile phenols from the bound form. We looked at it and we only found a 28% increase. So there's also an impact of the concentration of what is available, the amount of precursor available. Our wines wasn't as impacted as in the Australian study. In the beginning, people also said, well, let's not worry about it because if it's bound, you can't smell it, so it's not a problem. Unfortunately, that isn't true either. A study showed that we have bacterial enzymes in our saliva, so you can actually hydrolyze the bound in your mouth. And this is why the longer you keep a wine in your mouth and the more you taste it, the more smoky and ashtray-like it becomes. It's because you have this buildup. And we think this is the bound that actually contributes significantly to that kind of ashtray retronasal character because it's being released in your mouth. Because they extract so quickly and they're glycosylated, I think anything you do in the winery to extract color in red wines will probably extract your volatile phenols as well. Another thing that a lot of people are asking is about threshold value. Now, the thing is, a threshold value is, first, an odor threshold value can be the lowest concentration where 50% of the population can notice that there's a difference. It has an impact. The recognition threshold is where you can recognize what it is, like guaiacol, oh, now it's smoking. But it's really more about consumer rejection. When does it become a fault? And when does it actually decrease the quality of your product? The problem here is that we actually know the threshold values of most of these volatile phenols on their own in base wine. But the matrix have a large impact. The threshold is different depending on which wine you actually evaluated. And all these compounds have synergistic impacts. So if you look at a guaiacol on its own, it has a high threshold value, but it can be a problem in a wine at a 1/10 of that value because there's not just guaiacol present. There's 4-methyl guaiacol, all the cresols, stearinol, etc. So this is the problem. You need to actually determine threshold values in different combinations of different concentrations in different wine matrices. Because we know very fruity aromas can mask it. If you have a lot of phenolics, high alcohol, and a little bit of sugar, you can hide that ashtray character. Those things also inhibit the activity of the enzyme in your saliva. However, we know green character like, grassy, methoxypyrazines, green pepper can uplift smoky characters. And then you have a lot of human variability as well. So these studies, you need like 100 consumers to figure out the threshold value of one compound. Another interesting study looking at bottle aging, the Australians, because they had so many studies that they've done over several years, where they have intentionally smoked vines. So they had control and smoke impacted wines from different varieties. And 5-6 years later, they went back to them, reanalyzing the free and total numbers and redoing the sensory evaluations. Now, the control wines had slow hydrolysis of the bound, just like the smoke impacted wines, but they were still not impacted. The smoke impacted wine became more smoke impacted over time. Now, they said it's because the phenolics decreased, the fruitiness decreased, and it just stood out more because according to them, the hydrolysis was actually very small. There wasn't a lot being released. But that's if you looked at the pool of bound. If you look at the amount of free and how that changed, the change was 40 to 500%. So I'm not sure that that didn't play a role as well. It's probably a combination of the two. So what do we know about smoke exposure risk? And I get a lot these questions about, should I be worried? Now, at this point in time, we're saying fresh smoke, biggest risk, greatest risk. There is not a good correlation between smoke taint risk and density of smoke or air quality indexes. When the smoke is fresh, there is a close correlation. But as the smoke gets older, that correlation decreases because what you're seeing, particulate matter, is mostly carbon. Volatile phenols are small. You can't see them with the naked eye. They actually break down in a matter of hours in the atmosphere, but it depends on a lot of things, how quickly they break down. The other thing is they can use things like ash as a carrier, and we don't know how that impacts their speed of breaking down. So anecdotal evidence from Australia indicate like around 24 hours is where the risk decrease significantly. But this is the focus of a future SRI grant to figure out this and see if we can develop low-cost sensors that can relate to smoke taint risk in a vineyard. Washing grapes. So a lot of people looked at washing grapes. So washing grapes do not remove any volatile phenols because they're not on the outside of the grape, they're inside. But what about ash? Now that is a tricky question. The problem with ash is that I collected ash this season in our own vineyard and I analyzed it. Now, when we analyze it, you put it in a vial, you heat it to 50 degrees Celsius, you shake it and you look at the headspace. And yes, it was releasing volatile phenols and it was releasing it for up to a week. But the thing is, was that release enough to make a difference in the atmosphere in your vineyard? I don't know. I really do not know. Should you remove it from the grapes? Now, wet ash, Tom Collins told me, wet ash actually release more volatile phenols than dry ash. So should you wash it off and then it's lying on the canopy floor, releasing more volatile phenols? It's very, very difficult to determine if that's a problem. I think the thing that for me is more worrying is if you have really fresh ash and you're picking grapes and processing it in the winery. If it's fresh enough that it contains volatile phenols, will those volatile phenols be released during the winemaking process? And that is something both myself and Tom investigated this past season, and hopefully we'll have some answers before this 2021 season. Kari Wilkerson did a study that they just published where they actually did misting. They did a smoke exposure study and they actually had like a mist of water to see if that helped mitigate. The problem is they only applied it to the high smoke exposure study. And the high smoke exposure was, I think the particulate counter was like over 2,000. It was so high that why bother? That vineyard has been burning, basically. It was just too high. They did see some decrease in volatile phenol numbers, but they were all sensorily impacted because I just think the exposure was excessive. That study would be very interesting if we could repeat it to more like numbers that make sense, definitely less than 500 in particulate matter. Then the whole question about grape sprays that can protect grapes. Now, the Australians did a study with Cowlin where they showed that it did decrease the absorbance of volatile phenols in one variety, but it didn't work in two other varieties. So that is always a little bit suspect when you don't see something happen consistently. They told me that they think this is due to timing of application differences and the fact that if you apply a spray in the vineyard, you only get about 30 to 40% coverage, and that it was very variable among the different varieties. Then British Columbia also did a study looking at two fungicides, and both of them had oils as stickers and a biofilm, a phospholipid biofilm called Parker. And what they found was that the fungicides with the oil actually made it worse. It's almost that they said it increased the surface area in the berry and it allowed more volatile phenols to absorb. I don't know if it was like a conduit into the berry that it dissolved into it and was a pathway in, but the Parker showed really good results for Pinot Noir. They had applied it a week before smoke exposure. I know they redid that study, changing the timing of application. And one of it was a day before, and the results did not look that good. So just keep that in mind, that it's still, that still needs to be investigated further as well. So for on the winery side, you know, currently mitigation, it is white wines, gentle processing because it's in the skin. So the less damage, the better. Hand picking if possible is not always possible. Exclude mog and rachis. We don't know if rachis is a source of volatile phenols. We're investigating it this year. Light pressing, definitely if you press harder, that mechanical force even press more of the volatile phenols that didn't solubilize into your wine or juice. What about finding the juice if you know it's impacted rather than wine? You have more tools in your winery toolbox to build back the flavor and body that you lost. That's something I looked at this year as well. For red wines, I think it's really low to medium. If you have low to medium impact using a fruity yeast, toasty oak, all of those things can mask the smoke impact, but I found it to be transitory. It just keeps coming back. For rosé is an option if it makes economic sense. The problem with a rosé is that it will handle less of the marker compounds because you have a simpler matrix, so it can stand out more. So really for me, really a solution for lower impacted wines. People with a lot of inventory have had success with just donating skins from another ferment to ferment a red juice, and that worked really well. So in 2017, I had a red blotch trial, and it was impacted by the 2017 fires in Napa. And I ended up doing a smoke-related study. And I looked at all the recommendations Australians were making, and they were making them based on studies that they did over several years on different varieties under different conditions. So I did everything on Cabernet Sauvignon. I looked at different yeasts. I looked at all the oak tannin additions and things they recommend. I looked at different fermentation temperatures. What I can tell you is that, yes, I found pretty good results with BDX and Nobili Fresh as an oak chip in the wine, but after a while, the smokiness came back. The Lodi tannin didn't work very well, but Australia found not good results with BDX. So it's really a matrix impact as well. One thing is not going to work for all your wines, and you're going to have to do trials. With a 7-day skin contact time, it didn't matter what fermentation temperature I used. It was smoky, and the same amount of volatile phenols came out. So skin contact time is really the key factor. The Silverado Trail trial was, Lafort was suggesting, what about using enzymes, get all the color out, tannin to stabilize it, press after 3 days, and then finish fermentation. It didn't work because as soon as you have all the anthocyanins out, unfortunately, you help getting all the bound volatile phenols out as well. So in the next year, I looked at amelioration. There was a lot of options out there, different enzyme treatments, enzymes that's available in the food industry, already approved by the FDA. The Australians looked at 15. I only looked at 5 different ones. Then I looked at different fining, activated charcoal, molecular imprinted polymers. So that is not available in the US market. It's where they apply the molecular imprinted technology to a polymer. Basically, it creates a cavity that has a high affinity for your template. And your template is the key molecule you want to remove. So in this case, it would be a volatile phenol. It works pretty well. Then reverse osmosis, both techniques available, and spinning cone. So what I did was, 2018 was the Lake County fires, Lake Mendocino County. And I got grapes gifted from something very close to the fires and something further away. And the high impact, I separated in a press fraction and a free run fraction. So I had a very high impact, a medium impact, and then a low impact from my 2017 Oakville wines. And I did all the treatments on all of them, but not all of them, because sometimes I had volume issues. But basically what I found was, this is what you're seeing here is a graph having all the free volatile phenols and how much a treatment decreased it. All these treatments decrease the amount of free volatile phenols significantly. And how much it removed depended on the wine. So there's once again a matrix impact. And remember, you don't have to remove everything. Volatile phenols are in all wines. You just need to remove it, that it's below the threshold for the lifetime of the wine. However, when you look at the bound, the total, this is total numbers, you will see, so the bound is included. You'll see it doesn't look quite as rosy. There was a decrease, and depending on the technique, some work better than others. And what I can tell you is the low to medium impact, it removed more. So it worked better in that matrix. And it did look like it had a better impact. But most telling would be the sensory. So we did sensory evaluations. And what we found was this. If you look in the left corner with the green circle around it, that's our controls, right? So you want the controls to have no smokiness on the nose, no ashtray character in the back palate. On the right, you will see we have on the right bottom, there's ash, that is retronasal. And you have peat with smoke, that's on the nose. And what you will see is anything with a 3 and a 4 is the low to medium impacted wines. No matter what technique we used, for the low to medium impact, we could remove that character. But for others, we couldn't. Now, the thing is, we treated all the wines the same so that we can compare them. So I treated them all so that the high impact is optimally improved, but it really removed everything in the lower impact. Obviously, it also means all of these were impacted as far as color and body and phenolics and aroma goes. It does come back after a while. So I would definitely say if you treat as early as you can, but it doesn't get back to where it was. All these techniques lack specificity, and one technique might work better for one wine matrix and another for another. So you really need to do bench trials. I want to quickly just cover how to determine risk. What we really do need is baseline for each variety. The Australians have spent a lot of time and money doing this for their industry. Basically, how are you supposed to know what's elevated if you don't even know what is baseline? They spent 7 years to get 4 years without smoke impact, to get the seasonal variability for 12 of their top varieties, both in the grapes and in the wines. So that when they do an analysis, they can give you results based on baseline. So on the right, there's a graph with baseline for the specific variety, and these are the bound compounds. So say you have something like this. If your data is a circle, it's basically your wine is mid to below baseline. So then you have like no to almost no risk. If your data comes back elevated, so it's lightly elevated, still baseline, but there's a high baseline, you have some risk. And if it comes above baseline, then you have very high risk, right? It's a more informative number. It's easier to interpret. But we're probably going to need a combination of that and what I talked about earlier about threshold value. Knowing for my specific variety and the wine style I'm making, what is the consumer acceptance level? So that you can go, okay, what is between baseline and consumer acceptance? And that it would be over the lifetime of the wine. Then you have a smaller range that you're aiming for and can evaluate what to do on the grape side and what to do on the winery side. So current recommendations is probably not going to change from what we said last year. Take a berry sample as close to harvest as you can because that relates to winemaking. Small scale winemaking is still going to be the thing. Make sure it's representative. So no matter how big your scale, you want 30 to 40 clusters, one per vine, so it's representative of your block. I did do a video of how to make small scale wines. I had one night and no script. So, you know, if you ever watched it, just keep that in mind when you judge. I'm no actress, but the idea is to help. And if you do take a berry sample, freeze some of it if you have to go back to it later in litigation or anything else. And also, if you are in the situation where there's a fire and the smoke is still coming your way, but haven't been there yet, go and take a berry sample so that you have baseline, at least for your own grapes. That will help you a lot when you look at impact numbers. So currently, really sensory evaluations. Microfermentations release some of the free, and it's easier to analyze analytically. So it gives you a little bit better value. And also sensory. I mean, it's really hard. People rather would have an instrument giving them a number, but unfortunately that number isn't 100%. We can taste these things so long as you make sure that the people you use can taste it. 20 to 25% is very insensitive or not sensitive at all to smoke taint. So make sure that they can taste it. You have to wait 2 minutes in between. This is not fast tasting. There's a lot of carryover. So you do need a high impact control to make sure people can taste it. And you need a control to make sure that there's no carryover. And sometimes you get people that seem to taste smoke everywhere, to make sure you don't have one of those on your panel. What the Australians have been doing is they have one rating on the nose for all smoke related characters, one rating on the palate. And I think that's a very good way, simple way to go. So this harvest, I did a lot of micro bucket fermentation, research scale, larger scale if I could, to see how does grape numbers actually relate to microfermentations and how does microfermentations actually relate to larger scale. Also, you know, we say it takes a week, but it takes longer. My 100+ microfermentations, many of them took more than 5 days to go dry. They need to go dry for you to evaluate because the sugar can hide the smoke. Then you want to clarify them. That takes another week. So it really was more like 2 weeks. Using high mass, but basically yeast, high nitrogen, doing just alcohol extractions to taste. Does that perhaps, or sous vide method, does that actually relate to winemaking? And we started on the whole baseline thing. We had so many vineyards of several varieties being exposed to similar amount of smoke. And we hope next year we can go back to get baseline data for those grapes. And we did a lot of applied winemaking stuff. People ask me about the ash, they ask me about rachis. So we did a lot of with cluster, whole cluster pressing, whole cluster fermentations versus not. We did washing ash off, not washing ash off before fermentation. We did rosé winemaking versus red winemaking versus pressed fractions versus free run. And I also did a reference wine. Thank you for everybody that gifted me grapes and that I could accept. I ran out of space, but the idea is to make a reference wine that one day when we can do in-person workshops again, we can actually do some training and how to sensorially evaluate these bucket fermentations and send you home with a reference standard so you can calibrate you against this reference standard. I have a standard that's probably a 9 out of a 9. So the take-home message, unfortunately, here is smoke doesn't equal smoke taint. That's a little bit of good news. But smoke taint marker analysis have limited predictive capacity. It's not that bad, but we have a huge gray zone. And without baseline data and threshold values, we just can't get that baseline, the gray zone down. There's currently no known mitigation in the vineyard, and we have limited mitigation in the winery. Amelioration treatments work, but unfortunately, they all lack specificity and they all impact the overall quality of the wine and highly impact the wine. If you can't blend it away, amelioration is probably not the best option. So ongoing future research projects, I just wanted to mention this. There's a list of things that we still need to investigate, and we are trying. And it's not just me or University of, at UC Davis. I'm talking about everybody that I know of. We need to look at atmospheric data, how that relates to grape smoke exposure risk, and can we develop low-cost sensors that can relate to risk? Improve our marker compound analysis. Develop fast, cheap measurement tools, not all things GCMs and LCMs that cost $200 a sample. Develop grape protective sprays specifically for this issue and other vineyard mitigation actions. Improve our amelioration strategies, targeted amelioration strategies, obtain baseline data for our varieties, and obtain the consumer acceptance levels for all varieties and wine styles. Now, unfortunately, the bad news here is I'm talking probably about 10 years of research and $30 million, but it's doable. And hopefully with all this together, we can over time develop a grape smoke exposure like management guideline with like a decision tree. If you have this, you do this. If you have this, these are your options to try and help the industry more than we are currently able to help. Thank you for the people that have given me financial support. Unfortunately, without money, it's really difficult to do a lot of stuff. And all my students that have worked with me on this, they're the ones that are really, really working really, really hard. And some photos from Harvest 2020. What a harvest. Thank you very much. I forgot to put my timer on, so hopefully I'm not excessively over time.
Thank you very much, Anita. And We're about 5 minutes over, but we only have one question right now. So that's okay. We'll give about 5 minutes for questions. The question presented is, can you expand on molecular imprinted polymer to treat for smoke taint? And the comment is, it seems from the study there were lots of positive impact with that, but I think you mentioned restrictions on the use of it in the US.
Yes, so it's not currently in the US available for treatment. It doesn't have approval. I think they're investigating it. This is a company from New Zealand, actually, that makes this resin. And when I had to test it, you know, I had to pack a column and put wine through it and treat it with liters and liters of pure alcohol. So it's not at the moment at any sense practical for a commercial application, but it does have some real possibilities there. So hopefully soon. They're waiting for the results of my final results of the study, and I need to reconnect with them to see where they are in their development and scaling up what they're doing.
Thank you. We have a comment. Someone saying your small fermentation videos are great and they may have more applicability to winemaking beyond smoke taint amelioration. So,
Thank you very much. That was very stressful.
another question. Is there a known vicinity from a wildfire in which grapes are susceptible to taint? I understand wind is the unknown variable, but maybe how far from a wildfire can smoke damage be seen?
Unfortunately, and I've talked to my colleagues in Australia about this a lot as well, there just isn't a number. Because just to highlight this, what sometimes happens is, and a good example was in the Adelaide Hills, when the fires actually went through the Adelaide Hills, there was little pockets of vineyards. I thought no vineyard would be able to make decent wines. And it's not true. There was actually pockets that was very close to the fire, but just because of the wind direction and how it moved and the speed at which the fire moved, there was pockets that were fine. And we saw this in Napa as well now. With all the smoke exposure, you get, and you can't predict it, that is fine and others aren't fine because topography and a lot of other things also have an influence. So the problem is sometimes you have a vineyard that's 10 miles away and it's less impacted than one that is 100 miles away. The best that I can say at this point in time is probably if you're very close to a fire, you have a risk, whether you see smoke or not, right? If you're really, really close. But other than that, if you're a distance away from the fire, how quickly the smoke got to you. If a fire started and you only got the smoke 3 days later, I think your risk is on the lower side. But obviously what sometimes happens is when you have fires everywhere, you have no idea what's fresh and what is old. And you know, that is a concern. But for us, as an example, Paso Robles, they got a smoke from the Fresno fire, but they only got it like 2-3 days later. I'm not very concerned, for instance. I don't say there's no risk, but the risk is definitely on the low side for smoke from that fire because they didn't have anything close. Everything they got was from other fires, and they sort of got an idea how long it took to get there.
Thank you. And we'll maybe squeeze in, we got 1 minute for one quick question. Related actually in some ways, any type of physical air movement method studied, like wind machines, frost mitigating machines, can they keep smoke out, I guess?
That is all things that we would like to look at. If any of those infrastructure we already have in place for other problems can be used to help us. Absolutely no data, nothing on any of these things. But yes, we're trying to work at many angles at once so that we can come to solutions quicker than trying to do things sequentially.
Thank you so very much, Anita. I know that everyone really appreciates your work, and thank you for that really nice detailed presentation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was great to talk to everyone.
Wonderful. So we're going to move on now. I do want to make a reminder, please, that we're going to have an evaluation of this program at the end. You should get it when you log out, but it'll also be posted at the end of the day. So please do fill that out for us. It really does help us in continuing to bring this kind of programming to you. Without further ado, we have Lodi's very own Dr. Stephanie Bolton, Research and Education Director for the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, and she's going to close us out with some updates and closing remarks. So over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Lodi Grape Day this year. Now that you know all about Miss Stone-Smith's efforts to slow the glassy-winged sharpshooter's northward invasion, Dr. Shrestha's weed management tips for yield and wine grape quality, Dr. Kurterall's Vineyard of the Future vision, and Dr. Oberholster's around-the-clock efforts to clear up the smoke around smoke exposure, I'm going to continue Paul's tradition of allowing me a little time to update you on our Commission viticulture projects focusing on IPM research. At the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, our mission for the last 30 years has been to enhance profitability through promotion, research, and education. Over time, as contracting research with universities became more and more expensive, our research aim had lost some steam. So the research committee, Stuart Spencer, and I have been working hard to reinvigorate it to meet the needs of our growers and our region, in the most economical way, of course. We began this research reinvigoration by establishing what we call research focus groups around specific topics of interest and concern to our growers. In 2016, we launched the Mealybug Biocontrol Research Focus Group, followed by the Lodi grapevine virus and the new grapevine rootstock groups. The amazing volunteers making up these teams set clear, attainable objectives, learning about their topic from the ground up, taking in knowledge locally, regionally, and internationally, and partnering with experts for advice on developing practical research for others and outreach for others with the biggest impact. These research focus groups have been well received and helped us earn grant dollars from various programs. This grant funding gave us a seat at the table with a lot of researchers, attracting attention to Lodi's viticulture leadership and further strengthening connections that ultimately boost our local learning capacity. Teamwork is one of our community's biggest strengths. There is no doubt that together we are stronger and wiser. Our research focus group's superpower has been that we involve all facets of our industry so that we can tackle challenges by better seeing the big overarching picture and thus deliver faster real-world outreach. Often we found that our industry isn't as connected as we would have thought or had hoped, and it's been a lot of fun to collaborate around the unified goal of increasing profitability for farmers. I'm very happy to report that because of strong leadership and dedicated growers, today we have a huge network of scientists, conservationists, and other professionals to help us advance viticulture in Lodi, California. It feels wonderful and exciting to now have scientists contacting us on a weekly basis to collaborate and to help shape the direction of their research projects so that they line up with our local needs and challenges. We even worked with NASA on a hyperspectral imaging disease detection project this fall. The possibilities are endless. Of course, we are committed to sharing what we learn with our entire community in grower and sometimes even in kid language. For example, as part of our Western SARE grant project, we produced an 8-minute video on mealybug biocontrol in vineyards, which can be viewed on YouTube or from our website, lodigrowers.com. If you haven't seen it yet, grab your family and check it out. The most popular piece of outreach that we created in 2020 was a 138-page book on mealybug and virus management, full of pictures, practical information, and local case studies. This book was a main output of our virus focus group, building upon the knowledge gained from our mealybug biocontrol group. It was collaboratively written with experts from around the world
and has already made it onto the bookshelves of hundreds of people across California and beyond. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, just contact the Lodi Wine Grape Commission. These books are free thanks to grant funding. Remember when I told you that industry teamwork leads to faster, more practical research, results that help farmers be more profitable? Well, here are two examples. We, Lodi growers and PCAs, worked together with scientists, including Dr. Akif Escalin and Dr. Maher Awarwana, to elucidate the cause of the sudden vine collapse, which involves mealybugs, viruses, and virus-sensitive rootstocks. We also worked with a grower to petition the Tree Assistance Program, or TAP, to include leaf roll virus as a natural disaster eligible for funding so growers can get financial help to remove an infected vineyard. In the Red Virus book, there are whole sections on the sudden vine collapse and on the USDA Tree Assistance Program, and this info is also available online at lodigrowers.com. By this point in my talk, I hope you are getting excited about the growth of our viticulture research programming and our abilities to translate science into practical help for growers. To further enhance the Commission's viticulture research programming, enabling statistically significant and collaborative on-farm research trials across Crush District 11 on topics of concern for our growers, our Commission Board has approved the hiring of our very own viticulture research specialist. This new position builds upon the Lodi wine growers' commitment to continuous learning and improvement and our unique ability to design cohesive, replicated trials across a broad region to include different grape varieties, soil types, management practices, and more. This job is advertised on winejobs.com. The viticulture research we have going on won't have any meaning without your outstanding participation. We are so fortunate to have growers, PCAs, viticulture consultants, extension personnel, government agencies, and industry reps show up in such large numbers to learn, like today. Lodi really is special in this regard. I visited a gorgeous facility for wine growers in Italy with a 200-acre demonstration vineyard and a large modern classroom, and they said they were lucky if a dozen people showed up at their outreach meetings. In Lodi, sometimes you all surprise us, and there are white trucks for days. We have to add more chairs along the wall in Burgundy Hall. Thank you. Here are some ways you can keep in touch so that you know about the viticulture research and outreach happening in our community. We post weekly blogs and have a local opportunities page with upcoming events of interest under the Education tab on lodigrowers.com. If you prefer snail mail, we also send out newsletters and postcards, so contact the Commission to get on our mailing list. Another example of where our region is leading the way is sustainability. Our Lodi Rural Sustainable Wine Growing Certification Program, developed from the ground up, continues to grow. This is a friendly reminder that applications for the 2021 Lodi Rural Certification Year are due by February 15th. Find out more at lodigrowers.com under the Lodi Rules tab. Thanks for all you do to raise the bar for our region, and on behalf of the Lodi Chamber Agribusiness Committee, we're very happy that you spent this afternoon with us learning from our fantastic speakers. We hope that you will join us for Lodi Farm Safety Day on March 4th. A huge shout out to our sponsors who make these two annual events possible, and thanks to Callie McFarland, Dr. Kamyar Aram, and Dr. Kari Arnold from UC for helping out this year. Today's event was recorded and will be available with closed captioning soon on, you guessed it, lodigrowers.com. See you at the 70th Lodi Grape Day next year.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for those words. I think
Thank you,
Kelly has
Kari.
thank you. Kelly has a few reminders for us.
Yes, so up on the screen now is reminders about the continuing education and as well about the evaluation. For DPR, You will get an email. I'll probably stay on and work and get you guys this email today. But if you don't see it, you can email A&R program support. You get the exam, you take it, and you'll get your results within a week. Next Tuesday, that exam will close. So that is the last day you can take the exam. For Certified Crop Advisor, the QR code is up on the screen now. So if you have the app, open your phone to that app and just scan it and your hours will count. That's all you have to do. I'll leave this up for another couple of minutes here so that you can do that, or if you need to download the app real quick. If you don't have the app, you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, just send me an email, the A&R program support at UCANR with your information, and I'll get you added. The last thing I'm going to put in the chat, if I can find it, is the evaluation. Please take the time to fill that out. It's very short. It shouldn't take you very long. That will be very helpful in facilitating more events like this in the future. And I think that's it. I'll leave this up. We'll keep the meeting open for another couple of minutes here. And I don't have anything else. Kari, Kamyar, anybody has anything else to add?
I think I'll just mention huge thank you to Kelly McFarland and huge thank you to the A&R Program Support Unit for doing all the background work to put this meeting together. And thank you again to the sponsors for funding the Program Support Unit and all of their inputs. And of course, big thank you to all the attendees today. We reached about 178 attendees. That's fantastic. I hope we all learned something new. We have no reason to be here if you don't need us. So we're just really happy to be needed. We're happy to provide you some information and some education, and I hope it helps you in the future. So let us know on that survey. It wasn't just me putting together the agenda. It was a big team effort of the many people that you saw today and a few different meetings and collaborations. And so hopefully we hit a mark, and hopefully next year we'll do even better. And yeah, I say you're free to go.
Thank you, Kari, and thanks everyone.
Thank you very much for helping out. Have a wonderful afternoon. Stay dry. Thanks for spending a rainy day with us online. Cheers. See you next year.